Chapter 11, An Overlord and a Succubus. We made it back to Karn village just in time. I could hear the villagers screaming everywhere in panic and running for cover. I was expecting to run into some ruthless bandits or possibly even monsters. What I wasn't expecting to find was an entire band of silver and blue knights. They all wore plate armor, and their weapons were high-quality steel. I couldn't imagine why knights would go around massacring innocent villages. Their reasons didn't matter though. Their lives were forfeit when they decided to attack my village. My arrival didn't go unnoticed by the horde of knights. I was so large that my every step shook the very earth under my feet. Strangely, the murderous false knights seemed to be more intimidated by the sight of the warrior captain on my back. "It's Gazef Stranov," one of the knights cried out in alarm. "Fuck. He wasn't supposed to catch up to us this early. What do we do? He's riding a giant monster." Both Rias and Gazef quickly hopped off my back. "You monsters will pay for your crimes against the innocent." Gazef didn't waste a second once he hit the dirt. He was immediately moving again, surging forward into the ranks of knights. Martial art, six-fold flash of light. He swung his sword only a single time, but managed to cut down 6 knights at once. That was an impressive technique. Gazef quickly became a storm of blades as he moved on to more and more opponents. There were so many of them, at least 200 people altogether. The whole village didn't even have that many people. Rias took to the sky, her devil wings flapping behind her. "You all are the worst of humanity. Die in oblivion," she yelled and started throwing down orbs of destruction. I'm not sure if Rias has ever taken human life before this moment, but she wasn't hesitating at all to defend the villagers. The steel armor the soldiers wore didn't seem to be enchanted in any way, it all quickly disintegrated under her bloodline magic. I knew I couldn't join the fight in my giant fox form, so I took a couple of seconds to shrink back down to my humanoid shape. It took a couple more seconds for me to properly adjust to only having 2 legs again. Transforming between my 2 forms was always very strange. The giant monster is just a normal beast man. "Kill him," one of the closest knights shouted as he charged at me, his sword raised high above his head. He couldn't have telegraphed his attack more if he tried. As his blade came down, I casually caught it in my hand. The force of his strike wasn't even enough to break my skin. I saw his eyes widen in shock beneath his helmet just before I punched forward. My fist smashed into his chest, leaving a massive dent in his plate armor as he was launched out of the village, flying through the air. He probably didn't survive the impact. The other knights froze, their charges halted as they processed what had just happened. I was still holding his steel sword in my left hand. I raised it in front of all their eyes before snapping the sturdy metal like a twig. "I didn't sign up for this," one of them cried out in fear after my display. "This was supposed to be an easy mission," another knight added, his steel boots clattering as he shook in terror. Mission? Of course there was something more going on here. Something nefarious, no doubt. I locked onto them with my slitted pupils, my voice cold as ice. "This is going to be your last mission," I growled. My 9 tails bristled behind me, their fur standing on end with my fury. "You tried to kill the people of my territory." Needless to say, the rest of the knights didn't live long, but they were just a small handful of the much larger total. I swiftly dealt with even more knights as I moved through the village, my fists crashing through their armor with ease, my claws sundering their shields, and those who didn't fall to my strikes were incinerated by my foxfire, the blue flames engulfing them in seconds. It was all a blur of violence, but my mind was barely on the battle. I needed to find Henry. It was kind of a shitty thing to admit to myself at the moment, but I cared more about her safety than the rest of the villagers. She was now a part of my restaurant and therefore a part of my slowly growing family. I pounded on the door of her house, my fists slamming against the wood so hard I thought it might splinter. After a moment, her father answered, his face pale and filled with terror at everything that was happening. "Where's Henry?" I demanded, my voice might have come off a bit harsher than I intended. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. She ran into the forest, after Nimue, he stammered. Nimue got scared when the knights showed up and ran for it. Henry went after her. I cursed under my breath. Of all the times for this to happen. The forest was huge, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, and with the battle still raging around us, there were too many scents in the air. Tracking them both down wouldn't be easy, especially with so many people moving around and the smell of blood thick in the air. I clenched my fists, trying to think. Which direction? I asked urgently. He pointed shakily toward the edge of the village, where the forest began. That way, I think. Please, you have to find them. I couldn't go after Henry just yet, not while the village was still under attack. There were about 150 knights left, and most of them had surrounded Gazef and Rias. I knew Rias was relatively safe. With her devil wings, she could take to the sky if things got too dangerous. But Gazef was different. He was strong, no doubt, but still just a man. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I charged back into the fray, moving faster than the knights could react. Gazef was holding his own, but I could see he was starting to slow down. His constant use of martial arts was wearing him out, and Rias, though powerful, had already spent a lot of her demonic energy earlier during our zombie killing spree. I've got this. I called up to Rias. Rias was hovering above, still firing blasts of destruction magic, but her attacks were fewer and weaker than before. She gave a quick nod. Gazef, in the thick of things, sliced down 2 more knights but was breathing heavily. He noticed me coming up behind him and shot me a quick, grateful glance. Glad you're back, he muttered while parrying another sword away from himself. These guys are tough. They weren't really, not to me. But I couldn't go nuking them all with foxfire in the middle of the village. None of the villagers hiding in their houses would survive the intense flames. That meant I had to keep my attacks small. I slammed my fist into one knight's chest, crumpling his armor like paper. You take a breather, Gazef. I'll finish this. He hesitated for a moment, but he knew he was nearing his physical limits. I'll back you up, he finally said, stepping behind me to catch his breath. I stood in front of around 100 knights on my own now. Don't give up, men. They're all tired, kill them. Despite the heavy losses, these remaining knights were still coming at me furiously. As I fought them all, something gnawed at the back of my mind. I'd never had to take a human life before today. Now, I was about to take over 100. It felt strange. Not wrong, these knights were attacking innocent people, after all, but still. One knight lunged at me, sword raised high, and I countered with a small concentrated blast of foxfire, the blue flames consuming him in an instant. I didn't even flinch as I moved on to the next enemy. How are you holding up, Rias? I shouted as I slammed another knight to the ground, his armor crunching under the force of my blow. Running low on magic, she admitted, her voice a bit strained. But I can keep going. I admired her resolve. Rias wasn't one to back down, even when she was running on fumes. But I could see she was nearing her limit, just like Gazef, who was occasionally still lashing out with his sword but was now mostly on the defensive. And then, once there were only 50 knights left, something strange happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement coming from the direction of the forest. At first, I thought it might be another group of knights, but then I realized it was just one figure. A massive fucking zombie. This wasn't like the other undead we'd fought earlier. This one was huge, easily towering over everyone else around it. It wore dark black armor that gleamed menacingly, and in its hands, it carried a towering shield and a massive black blade that looked like it could cleave through anything in its path. It came charging toward the horde of knights, moving faster than anything that big should have been able to. Before anyone could react, the zombie knight slammed into their ranks, swinging its blade with brutal precision. Armor crumpled, and shields were torn apart. The sound of metal crunching and the cries of men filled the air. What "What is that thing?" one of the knights screamed, backing away in fear. Others tried to rally, to form a defensive line, but it was hopeless. The zombie cut through them with no mercy, its sword carving a bloody path through their ranks. I braced myself, expecting it to turn on me, Rias, or Gazef next. But to my surprise, it ignored us completely. It didn't even glance in our direction. Instead, it kept its focus on the knights, cutting them down one after another with relentless brutality. Rias hovered nearby, watching the brutal scene unfold with wide eyes. Why isn't it attacking us? She was clearly just as confused as I was. I don't know, I kept my guard up just in case. But I'm not complaining. Even as the remaining knights broke ranks, fleeing in sheer terror, the undead knight showed no signs of stopping its attack. It chased them down, cutting them down even as they begged for mercy. Gazef, breathing heavily beside me, wiped the sweat from his brow. "I've never seen anything like it," he muttered. "That thing, it's a monster." We watched in a strange mix of horror and fascination as the zombie continued its rampage, its dark armor shining with the blood of the knights it was cutting to pieces. Whatever this thing was, it was obviously helping us. But the question remained, why? The undead in the Katsa Plains seemed to hate all life in general and would attack anything and everything with a pulse. I didn't sense any real intelligence from the zombie knight, but it was clearly under someone's direction. The answer of who came swiftly. "That's enough, Death Knight." A large man wearing a strange mask appeared above us, floating in the sky. Next to him was a woman clad in full black armor. She was equipped with a massive axe. The moment he spoke, the Death Knight stopped its rampage, halting just before cutting down the last of the remaining knights. There were only a handful left after the carnage it had caused. The knights who remained tried to flee the village, but I quickly moved, knocking each one unconscious before they could escape. I tied them up for good measure. "Good thinking. Capturing a few of them, Sir Haru." "We'll find out why they did this," Gazef said while wiping off the blood on his sword. I wasn't an expert in interrogation or torture, but I had no doubt that my mother, Yasaka, had people skilled enough to squeeze the answers out of these murderous knights. The large, robed man floated down, landing in the center of the village near us. He eyed me and Rias curiously as she walked over to stand by my side. "Thanks for the help," I said, eyeing the Death Knight that had obliterated the enemy forces. "I take it that the big guy is yours?" When the masked man spoke again, his voice was deep and powerful. "Indeed. The Death Knight was created by me and answers to all of my commands," he replied. I nodded at him before asking, "You didn't happen to see a human girl named Enri out there, did you?" "I saved 2 human girls who were being chased by a pair of these false knights. The older one was severely injured, but I gave her a potion to heal," he said. I immediately let out a sigh of relief, the tension leaving my body. "Thank you so much. The older girl is Enri, and she's the waitress at my restaurant, the Fox Hole." "Restaurant, you say?" The man sounded intrigued, but before we could continue, Rias excitedly flew over to the woman in black armor. "Your armor is so cool looking. How strong is it? Is it heavy? You must be really strong. What's your name?" Rias asked rapidly, her inner otaku temporarily taking back over. "Oh, I'm Rias Gremory, and that's Haru, my fiancé," she added. The woman stared at Rias for a moment with her gaze specifically lingering on Rias's wings. "My name is Albedo," she said softly. "And yes, my armor is very heavy, but it makes me the perfect tank." "A tank? That's so cool!" Rias exclaimed. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle. Rias's excitement was helping diffuse the tense situation. "If I may ask, what race are you, Anne?" "Haru?" Albedo inquired after a moment. Rias responded with a little smile. "Oh, I'm a pure-blood devil, and Haru is a yokai kitsune. The most powerful version, with 9 tails," she added, clearly bragging on my behalf. The armored woman nodded. Ah, so neither of you are lower life forms, then. She trailed off. I tilted my head in confusion. Lower life forms? What did she mean by that? Before I could inquire further, the masked man awkwardly cleared his throat and spoke to me again. I'm surprised you have a restaurant in a tiny village like this, he said, steering the conversation back on track. I shook my head. The restaurant isn't actually located in this village. Well, it is, but it's also not. It's hard to explain, but I'm actually from a place called Kyoto. Mamanga, Kyoto? Mamanga asked in genuine confusion. That was a city in Japan. A city that had been completely destroyed in nuclear hellfire in the year 2055, never being rebuilt afterwards. The kitsune, Haru, nodded at him. Mamanga wasn't sure what to think, so he did what he'd done ever since arriving in this strange new world, where all his guild's NPCs had suddenly come to life. He simply nodded and went along with it. The kitsune yokai, who registered as very powerful to his subtle detection spells, ran a restaurant of all things. Sure, why not? The kitsune was also engaged to a smoking hot pure-blood devil for some reason. Of course, why wouldn't he be? Mamanga rolled with all of it. He even rolled with it when one of Haru's tails seemed to split off from himself and created an actual clone. Whoa! I didn't know you could make clones, Haru. Rias said. How come you don't use them to fight? Creating a clone splits off one of my tails, which actually severely weakens me, the kitsune said. Momoga did notice that Haru suddenly felt a lot weaker. His clone quickly sprinted out of the village and headed into the forest, presumably to find Haru's missing human waitress that Mamanga had saved earlier. The now 8-tailed Haru invited Mamanga and Albedo over to a building that stood out sharply from the others. While the surrounding structures looked like they were made of sticks and rough wood, this place looked like an actual well-constructed building. This is the Foxhole, my restaurant that connects to other dimensions, Haru said casually, opening the door and gesturing for them to enter. If Mamanga still had eyebrows, he was sure they would have shot up at that comment. Other dimensions? Was such a thing possible? Then again, he was a literal Isekai character now, so of course it was possible. As they stepped inside, Mamanga couldn't help but marvel at the interior. It was a cozy family restaurant, the kind he had only seen in old photographs. On his Earth, pollution made it so that most restaurants simply couldn't operate, except in the bubbled-off districts for the wealthy elite. Places he was never allowed to go as a member of the lower caste workers. This was all a very novel experience for him. Haru motioned for them to sit wherever they liked. Mamanga eyed one of the booths but realized his new body was far too large for it, so he settled for sitting across from Albedo at a sturdy wooden table. In a sudden flash of light, Albedo unequipped her armor, revealing her flushed face and a wide, gleeful smile. I'm sitting in a restaurant with my beloved Mamanga-sama. Is this a date? She squealed, her voice filled with delight. Mamanga internally cringed but kept his calm exterior. It's just a meal, Albedo, he said. Haru chuckled, placing 2 glasses of water in front of them, followed by menus. Take your time in deciding. Everything here is made fresh, he said with a smile. Mamanga glanced down at the menu, and if he had a stomach, it would have rumbled with anticipation. The pictures on the menu were of real, actual food, dishes with ingredients he had only dreamed of in his past life. Back then, the world's food supply had mostly been reduced to synthetic paste, mass-produced for survival rather than pleasure. But here was real meat, real vegetables, real flavors. Albedo was already eagerly browsing the menu, her eyes sparkling as she scanned the selections. Mamanga-sama, what shall we have? Anything you desire, I'll have too, she said, almost bouncing in her seat. Wow, Albedo. I didn't think you'd be so pretty outside of your armor. I love your wings and horns. Rias called out from where she sat at the bar, next to a human man they'd been fighting with earlier. Her tone was light and friendly, a playful smile on her face. A small pink blush crept across Albedo's cheeks at the compliment. Momonga watched, once again feeling his undead trait forcefully suppress his emotions. Seeing Albedo's flustered reaction would have stirred something in him if not for his trait. It annoyed him every time. Why had he thought it was a good idea to roleplay as an undead in the first place? He should have picked a dragon, like Touch Me. Haru spoke up again, breaking Momonga's silent frustration. If I might make a recommendation, I've got some dragon meat left over from yesterday. It's perfectly preserved, and I can make some amazing steaks from it. Dragon meat. Albedo's excitement was immediate. Oh, I want that, she declared, instantly making her decision. Momonga turned towards Haru. What does dragon steak taste like exactly? He had never imagined eating something like that. After years of subsisting on synthetic chicken paste, it was hard to imagine anything else. Haru scratched his chin thoughtfully. It's hard to describe, but I'd say it's kind of like a wagyu steak mixed with alligator meat. Except it's even more tender and juicy. Momonga blinked. Well, he would have, if he could. He didn't understand a word of that comparison, but Haru sounded confident, so that was enough for him. We'll have that then, he said, ordering it for both himself and Albedo. Just because he didn't have a stomach didn't mean he couldn't eat. He had consumed healing items and elixirs in the game without issue, so why not food? Albedo was still glowing from Riasa's compliment and the anticipation of trying dragon steak. Momonga could feel the weight of her adoring gaze, and it made him feel very awkward all of a sudden. Shit, was this considered a date now? Judging by the look Albedo was giving him, the answer in her mind was yes. Haru smiled and moved back toward the kitchen. I'll get that started right away. You two are in for a real treat. Momonga leaned back in his chair, glancing at Albedo. Seeing her so happy was nice, in a way. Finally, he cleared his throat, more out of habit than necessity. Albedo, how have things been in Nazarick since we arrived in this new world? I assume managing everything must be challenging. Managing the guild when it had been a mere video game had been difficult for him. He couldn't imagine properly running the place with all the NPCs being alive. Albedo's smile softened. Oh, Momonga-sama, managing Nazarick is my greatest honor. Every day, I ensure that all the floors are in perfect order and that the guardians are fulfilling their duties. It's busy, yes, but also incredibly rewarding. I get to serve you and ensure the great tomb of Nazarick thrives in this new world. Momonga nodded, though his mind wandered. He had always viewed the NPCs in Nazarick as part of the game, nothing more than scripted characters with limited responses. But here, seeing Albedo speak so passionately, he realized she wasn't just spouting pre-programmed lines anymore. She really was alive. And what else do you do during the day? Momonga asked curiously. Albedo's golden eyes gleamed at him. Well, there's always something to oversee. Shaltir is a bit stupid, so I often need to remind her about how to properly perform her duties. Demiurge, on the other hand, is always plotting something intricate, and I help him ensure his plans align with your grand vision. And then, I make sure that the maids and staff are performing their tasks to perfection. She paused, smiling warmly. But my favorite part is reporting to you, Momonga-sama. Knowing that I'm supporting your rule makes everything worthwhile. She does all that every single day. Why, you've done well, Albedo, he said after a hesitant pause. I appreciate everything you've done for Nazarick, he said dryly, realizing that without her he would genuinely be screwed. Her cheeks flushed again, and she lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Your praise is all I desire, Momonga-sama. Haru approached the table, carrying 2 steaming plates of perfectly cooked dragon steaks. The rich, savory aroma filled the air, causing even Albedo to lean forward with eager anticipation. Haru set the plates down in front of them, grinning as he placed the final touches on the presentation. Enjoy, he said. Momonga hesitated for a moment. Slowly, he reached up and removed his mask, revealing his bare skull and glowing red eyes. He glanced first at Haru, expecting some form of reaction, fear, perhaps, or at least surprise. But Haru didn't even blink. He gave Momonga a friendly nod, as if seeing an undead lich was just another part of his day. Momonga blinked in surprise, well, metaphorically, of course. He wasn't expecting such a nonchalant reaction to his appearance. Before he could dwell on it, though, he heard a small squeak from the bar area. "Your glowing red eyes are so cool." Rias practically squealed from where she sat next to Gazef. She looked like she might bolt over any second to take a closer look. Gazef, on the other hand, shifted nervously in his seat, clearly uneasy with Momonga's undead nature, but trying to maintain composure. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, though he made no overt move to draw it. Albedo, of course, was practically glowing with pride as she smugly glanced over at the red-headed devil. Of course, Momonga-sama is the most powerful and magnificent being in existence. Rias just giggled back in response. Momonga turned his attention back to the steak in front of him. The rich, juicy meat looked more appetizing than anything he had ever seen before. With careful precision, he cut into the steak and took a bite with his bony mouth. Momonga paused for a moment, savoring the sensation of real food. "It's excellent," he said simply. That was an understatement. This was the single greatest thing he'd ever tasted. Real food was amazing. Albedo was practically swooning over her own steak, cutting bite after bite with a look of sheer delight on her face. "It's amazing, Momonga-sama," she said between bites. "And these mashed potatoes are also fantastic." Haru walked back into the kitchen as Momonga and Albedo continued their meal in peace. "Haru," after they finished their meal, Momonga approached me, gesturing for a more private conversation. I led him into the back, far enough from the others that no one could overhear us. "That meal was delicious," Momonga said. He thanked me for the experience. I waved it off with a grin. "I should be the one thanking you. After all, you helped save the village I own." His glowing red eyes focused on me. "I wanted to ask more about that. This seems to be a human village. How did you come to own it?" he asked. "And what is the deal with this strange restaurant of yours?" I chuckled and started explaining how my restaurant randomly started connecting to other dimensions a couple of weeks ago. Since then, I've had some pretty interesting customers. Many of them have become close friends, and, well, a few became something even more. I couldn't help but smirk a bit at that. Momonga lightly punched my shoulder when I casually mentioned that I had 2 fiancés, Rias and Ila the werewolf. "You lucky bastard." I tapped him right back with a grin of my own. "You're one to talk with a gorgeous succubus like Albedo literally throwing herself at you. You can't pass up something like that." Momonga hesitated a bit when I pointed that out. "I would like to be with her. But I can't exactly be in a relationship as a literal skeleton," he muttered, sounding self-conscious for a moment. I tilted my head at him. "Then why not learn some transformation magic? You could just assume a humanoid form and your problems would be solved." Momonga's red eyes glowed brighter, clearly surprised by my statement. "Transformation magic. Is such a thing possible?" he asked. I couldn't help but laugh a little, pointing at myself. "Dude, my yokai form is a 30-foot tall, 9-tailed fox. Of course, it's possible." "You are?" he asked in surprise. "Oh, right. You got here after I transformed back into my humanoid form." I shrugged, then added, "Yeah, yokai are pretty much the masters of transformation magic. Especially kitsune like me." Momonga stood there, processing the information. "If you want," I offered, "I can ask one of my cousins to teach you. It wouldn't be hard to arrange. Trust me, a human form could change a lot of things for you. Especially in the bedroom," I said while wiggling my eyebrows. "Oh. Do you have a lot of experience there, Mr. I have 2 fiancés?" Momonga asked me. "No," I admitted, and he chuckled at me. There was a moment of silence before Momonga nodded. I appreciate that offer, Haru. It's something for me to consider. Well, if you make a decision, you know where to find my restaurant. Feel free to stop by any time you want. I have a feeling we could be pretty good friends. And just wait until you meet my other buddy Agner. I added. After that, our conversation naturally turned back towards the attack we fought off. I honestly have no idea why these knights were massacring villages, but I'm sure my mother will squeeze the answers out of them. I'll also ask her to station a few yokai guards in the village from now on. There were a couple of yokai in this world, but they were all out exploring the surrounding forest for resources. Momonga wasn't aware that this was the third village to be attacked. This is no coincidence, and those knights were not poor bandits. All of their equipment was shiny and new. I sense some kind of conspiracy is behind these attacks, he pointed out, and I nodded in agreement. The two of us walked back into the main area of my restaurant where we spotted Rias happily chatting with Albedo. With my enhanced hearing, I could hear that they were both talking about how amazing their boyfriends were with each other. Yep, I wasn't getting involved in that conversation. Momonga and I both steered ourselves to the bar, where Gazef was sitting by himself. He apologized to Momonga for initially being distrustful of his undead nature, but Momonga waved him off. Even if this village is no longer part of the Riestai's kingdom, I still thank you for saving its former citizens. Gazef bowed to Momonga deeply. Oh, of course, the skeleton replied awkwardly. It was at that moment that the doors to my restaurant were thrown open. Enri ran inside with tears in her eyes. She was accompanied by my clone, which quickly faded away and returned my missing power to me. I was so scared. Enri hugged me tightly as I patted her back comfortingly. It's alright, everything is fine now, I said. At least, I thought it was until the doors banged open again. Enri's father stormed inside, with a look of panic. Lord Haru. More of those blue knights have surrounded our village, he exclaimed fearfully. Momonga, Gazef and I all exchanged glances with each other. More of them are showing up after we wiped out almost 200 of them. Fucking really? I grumbled. Momonga chuckled darkly and pat me on the shoulder. You don't have to worry, Haru. Let me and Albedo handle all of these foes for you. Albedo perked up upon hearing Momonga mention her name and immediately made her way over to us. Come along, Albedo, we have some enemies to deal with. Thank you for the wonderful meal, Lord Haru, Albedo gave me a slight bow. Till next time. I can't wait to come back here with Lord Momonga. I watched the two of them leave and shrugged. They were both very strong, easily ultimate class. I'm sure they will be fine. Chapter 12, Aliens and Needs. My restaurant was closed for the night, so I decided to head over to the Yokai Palace and report everything that had happened to my mother, Yasaka. I knew she wouldn't be pleased about the situation. Sure enough, when I told her about the attack on my new territory in another dimension, her eyes narrowed, and her frown deepened. Random knights, attacking your village? Yasaka's voice was sharp. Her 9 golden tails swayed slowly behind her, a sign she was trying to stay calm, but I could tell she was still very upset. Yes, I captured 9 of them, I replied, leaning against a nearby wall. I decided to not keep them together and split them up 3 ways. Gazef took 3 back to the Riestai's kingdom. 3 are being held in the village, in case Momonga is interested in questioning them whenever he returns. And the last 3, I pointed down, are in the dungeons here. Yasaka sighed, rubbing her temples. Clearly, we'll need to keep some permanent yokai guards in that village from now on, she said thoughtfully. At least until we decide if we want to set up a colony in that dimension. I nodded in agreement. That's a good idea. I don't want hostile people breaking into my restaurant or scaring my customers. Yasaka let out a small laugh, breaking the tension. Do you even have any customers that would actually get scared, Haru? I smirked. Reigen. She giggled again. That's true, I suppose. although Mob is usually there to protect his teacher. It wasn't exactly hard for us to find out Arataka Reigen didn't actually have any psychic powers whatsoever, but that didn't stop Yasaka from constantly hiring the guy. His apprentice Mob was the most powerful psychic anyone had ever heard of, and we'd still not seen the full extent of his powers. Even that terrifying evil spirit, being X, that had haunted Tanya through 2 lifetimes was nothing in the face of Mob's power. Yasaka chuckled when I brought those two up in the same sentence. You know, the last time I saw Mob, he asked how Tanya-chan was doing, she said, and I snorted. I couldn't help but chuckle as well. Ah, I guess he really did develop a little crush after she kissed him. No one had told him that Tanya used to be a man yet, we all just found it too funny to say anything. I spent the next half hour generally chatting with Yasaka about everything going on in Kyoto. Kuno was doing well with her tutors, and we were able to set up an official identity for Tanya-chan. The girl had taken a couple of tests that doubled as her high school exams, and last I heard, she was doing the same for her college courses. There was no reason for her to rush, considering she was in the body of a 13-year-old girl and already had a high-paying job, but obviously no one told her that. The little blonde ex-soldier had a more efficient work ethic than anyone I'd ever known. I didn't feel like returning to the restaurant, so I decided to spend the night in my bedroom at the palace. It had been a long day, and the comfort of my old bed was nice. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling well rested, and headed to the kitchen to make breakfast for Kuno, Yasaka, and Tanya-chan. It wasn't long before the smell of eggs and miso soup filled the palace halls. As I set the plates down, I noticed Tanya, sitting at the table, looking half awake. She barely acknowledged the food. It wasn't until I brought over a fresh pot of coffee and poured her a cup that her eyes started to focus. Morning, Tanya-chan, I said with a grin as she sipped her first cup. How are you holding up? She grunted, clearly still half asleep, and waved me off with a lazy hand. It wasn't until she had finished her third cup that she finally perked up, her eyes sharper and more alert. Much better. Thanks, she said, looking at the breakfast spread with more interest. I don't know how people function without coffee. Kuno, on the other hand, was already digging into her food. Oniai-chan, this is so good. You always make the best breakfasts. Thanks, Kuno, I smiled, watching her eat with enthusiasm. I then turned to Yasaka. I wanted to talk to you, mother, about something I forgot to bring up last night. Yasaka, sitting across from me with her usual serene grace, raised an eyebrow. Era? What is it, my dear son? Thanks for telling me that I'm now officially engaged to Rias now. I said with a bit of playful sarcasm. Yasaka grinned, giving me a mischievous look. I figured it would be a pleasant little surprise, she teased. You told me that she was with you during the attack yesterday. Were you two doing anything before that? I chuckled, shaking my head. We were actually on a date in the new dimension, killing zombies. Kuno's ears perked up, and she immediately interrupted, her eyes wide with excitement. Wait. You went and killed a bunch of zombies without me, Oniai-chan? That's not fair. She pouted, crossing her arms, clearly feeling left out. I laughed at her reaction. Sorry, Kuno, it was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. Next time, I'll make sure to invite you along. Even Tanya looked intrigued by the mention of zombies. She set her coffee down and leaned forward slightly. Zombies, huh? They would have made decent target practice to keep me in good form. She paused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. I've upgraded my arsenal since returning to a modern world. My guns and even my computation orb are much more powerful now. Could have been a fun way to test them out. Kuno looked even more excited at the idea of fighting zombies with her, and I could only imagine the chaos the two of them would cause together. Kuno wasn't particularly powerful yet, due to her young age, but the girl's head was full of mischief and she always found the strangest ways to utilize her limited yuki. Like the one time I watched her slap an explosive talisman onto her yo-yo to turn it into a deadly magical weapon. Yasaka's garden did not survive the destruction that day, and that was one of the few times Kuna ever got some well-deserved spankings from our mother. I returned to the foxhole in a good mood. Spending the morning with Kunu, Yasaka, and Tanya-chan had been exactly what I needed. As I stepped through the doors of the restaurant, I noticed Enri wasn't in yet, which wasn't all that surprising. After everything she'd been through yesterday, she was probably spending some much-needed time with her little sister. I didn't mind, it was quiet enough that I could handle things on my own for now. I walked behind the counter, checking to make sure all my cooking equipment was clean and ready to go. The kitchen was pristine, as always, my knives gleaming, and the scent of fresh ingredients lingered in the air. I turned on the stove and prepared some basic ingredients for breakfast, ready for anyone who might wander in. After about 10 minutes of peaceful silence, the door creaked open, and I looked up, smiling. "Welcome to the foxhole. You can sit anywhere you like," I called out cheerfully, waving a hand toward the empty tables. But instead of heading to a seat, the woman, paused in the doorway, staring at me with wide eyes. At least, I assumed she was a woman. She was stunning, her beauty was striking in a way that was otherworldly. Her skin, however, was dark blue. And instead of hair, she had these tentacle-like appendages that flowed down from the top of her head. I blinked, not entirely sure what I was looking at, but I smiled, trying to keep things casual. "Is everything all right?" I asked her as she stood in the entrance. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting around the restaurant before they settled back on me. There was something in her expression, confusion, maybe even caution. She seemed unsure of what to make of the place, or perhaps me. "Yes, sorry," she finally said, her voice soft, with a slight melodic tone. I didn't expect to find a place like this here." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, and I could sense she was trying to figure me out. "Well, I like to think the foxhole is full of surprises," I said knowingly. I gestured again to the tables or the bar. "Go ahead, make yourself comfortable." The woman nodded slowly, still looking a little uncertain, but she made her way to one of the empty booths close to the bar. She sat down carefully, her posture poised and elegant, as if she was used to being in control of herself, despite the unfamiliar setting. As I watched her, I couldn't help but wonder where she was from. The blue skin. The tentacle-like hair. This wasn't something you saw every day, even in my restaurant, which had been connecting to some rather strange places recently. Tevos, it wasn't often that Counselor Tevos found herself completely blindsided, but that was exactly how she felt as she stood in the doorway of this strange restaurant, the Foxhole. She wouldn't call herself reckless, but every once in a while, she enjoyed slipping away from the rigid structure of the Citadel and blending in among the civilians. Walking incognito gave her a different perspective, a better understanding of the people she helped govern alongside the other council members. And that's how she found herself discovering this new establishment that she didn't remember seeing the last time she walked the Presidium. She felt she had a firm grasp on the current state of affairs in the galaxy. That sense of control shattered the moment she walked into this establishment and was confronted with a being she had never seen before. She did her best to maintain her calm facade, but it took every ounce of her will to keep her face neutral. At first glance, she had thought the restaurant owner was just a human with an unusual choice in fashion. His outfit looked a bit dated to modern standards, but it was the golden ears and 9 swishing tails that really caught her attention. She had initially dismissed them as some kind of elaborate, perhaps cultural, costume. However, when she subtly reached out with her biotics, intending to get a faint sense of his aura, she felt something shocking. This man, if she could call him that, was no mere human. The sheer power that radiated from him was unlike anything she had ever encountered, more potent than any biotic presence she had sensed, even from the strongest Justicars. He exuded an energy so intense, so otherworldly, that Tevos instinctively knew this being could easily surpass any opponent the galaxy had to offer. She kept her breathing steady, her expression composed, but her mind raced as she tried to understand just what, or who, this being was. His golden ears twitched slightly, and those 9 large, fluffy tails swayed behind him as he stood there with a welcoming smile. "If you don't mind me asking, what exactly are you?" Tevos finally managed to say, her voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. She hoped the question didn't come off as rude. She knew many species across the galaxy could be sensitive when it came to direct inquiries, especially those concerning their nature. To her surprise, the man chuckled softly and let out a sigh of relief, as if she had eased some invisible tension. "I was just about to ask you the same thing," he said. His casual tone, combined with that easy smile, made her heart skip a beat. Tevos blinked. Well, that was unexpected. She hadn't been in her maiden years for quite some time, and yet something about him was undeniably disarming. Still, his response confused her. How could he be running a restaurant on the Citadel and not know what an Asari was? It was perplexing. She smiled politely, her confusion momentarily masked. "I see, well, I am an Asari," she explained. "My name is Tevos." She gave him her real name and noticed there was no recognition in his eyes. He smiled again, that same charming grin that seemed to glow with warmth. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Tevos. I'm Haru, and this is my restaurant, the Foxhole. I'm a kitsune yokai. Specifically, a 9-tailed fox." Tevos blinked, her curiosity now fully piqued. A 9-tailed fox? She put her finger to her chin, thinking. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She vaguely recalled that the island nation of Japan on Earth had ancient lore and myths about such creatures. But that's all they were supposed to be, myths. And now a myth was staring her in the face, and Tevos couldn't help but be a bit nervous. Especially considering the human myths sometimes portrayed 9-tailed foxes as literal gods. Tevos would have laughed at such an absurd concept if it was staring her in the face. "You own this restaurant?" she asked, keeping her practiced calm facade from years of being a politician. "I don't remember authorizing a new restaurant to open in the Presidium, especially directly across from the Citadel Tower itself." Pop! Tevos let out a small yelp as a data slab of all things randomly materialized from thin air with a soft pop. The metallic device floated for a split second before gravity took hold, but before it could hit the floor, Haru, with reflexes faster than anything she had ever seen, snatched it cleanly out of the air. His eyes darted over the slab's glowing screen as he casually skimmed through the information displayed. For a moment, Tevos just stood there, still processing the sudden appearance of the object. She hadn't even had time to question where it had come from when Haru turned around and, with a small, amused smile, handed it over to her. "What is?" "Huh?" Tevos nearly choked on her words as her eyes darted across the data displayed on the screen. Disbelief quickly washed over her as she processed what she was seeing. The slab contained a contract, one that authorized the sale of the very plot of Citadel land on which the Foxhole was sitting. Not just any contract, though. This one was unbelievable. The terms were beyond generous. The new owner, Haru, apparently, owned the plot outright, free and clear of any Citadel taxes, ever. And if that wasn't enough, it explicitly stated that he was allowed to operate any business he wanted from this plot, without needing any further approval from Citadel authorities. Her heart raced as her gaze landed on the bottom of the slab, where the electronic signatures of all 3 Citadel Council members were neatly displayed, including her own. Her fingers shook as she tapped on her name, and her Omni tool scanned and verified the signature. It was real. Tevos blinked, her mind reeling. Her Omni tool had the best security in the galaxy, it was designed to be unhackable. Did she actually sign this? There were so many forms, so many documents that were sent to her on a daily basis that, admittedly, she hadn't always been the most careful about what she approved. The bureaucracy of running the Citadel was immense, and not every document was scrutinized as it should be. But this? Haru tilted his head slightly, still watching her with that same calm, amused expression, as if this entire situation wasn't completely surreal. "Everything okay there, counselor?" he asked. There was a glint of mischief in his eyes that made her pout at him. Tevos stared at the data slab in stunned silence for a moment longer before finally looking up at him. How? How did this happen? She asked, her voice softer now, more bewildered than accusatory. Haru shrugged, his tail swishing lazily behind him as if the situation was no more serious than a casual conversation. I think you signed it, right? His grin widened slightly, and he gestured toward her signature on the slab. Looks like everything's in order. Tevos rubbed her temples, trying to push through the growing headache. I don't remember signing this, she admitted, her pride taking a hit. Haru, I shrugged at the pretty blue woman. It was obvious by now that my restaurant had appeared in yet another dimension, but something felt a bit different this time. What exactly was an Asari and what was the Citadel that Tevos was a council member of? From the way she talked about it, it sounded like it was a big deal in this dimension. Tevos gave me a strange look after I asked her my questions. The Citadel isn't on Earth, Haru, she explained with a touch of bewilderment. It's located far away in the middle of the Milky Way galaxy. I'm not from Earth either, I've never set foot on the planet. I was completely thrown by those responses. My jaw might have dropped a little as the realization dawned on me. Whoa. This Asari woman standing in front of me wasn't an offshoot of humanity or any other supernatural species like I had suspected. She was an actual freaking alien. My restaurant connected to a sci-fi universe with actual aliens and space travel. Kick ass. Rias was going to lose her mind when she heard about this. Ela was probably going to wonder if any aliens could put up a decent fight. I was still processing the shock of it all when Tevos spoke again. You seem awfully surprised to find all this out, Haru. Why is this all so shocking to you? Your restaurant is literally on the Citadel. I opened my mouth to explain, because of course this was shocking. The existence of aliens was pure speculation in both my lifetimes. But before I could, the front door swung open again. I turned toward the entrance, and my eyes lit up with recognition as a beautiful, lithe Japanese girl stepped inside. She was wearing an elegant kimono along with a few pieces of radiant jewelry. Her long black hair fell halfway down her back. Amy-chan. I called out, grinning from ear to ear. I've been wondering when you were going to show up. You missed my restaurant's grand opening. I said while creating a small illusion of tears forming in my eyes. Don't even start with the fake tears. Amy pouted. Yasaka has used that trick on me dozens of times already and I'm not falling for them anymore. Amy-chan blushed at me cutely. Sorry for missing your opening, Haru-kun. I lost track of time, she admitted while suddenly averting her eyes. I was rewatching One Piece from start to finish and couldn't pull myself away from the TV until now. That sounded like something she would do. Amaterasu rarely took the spotlight anymore, most other factions assumed she was taking a step back from politics and allowing some of the other gods in Takamagara to take charge. Nope. She was just a NET who kept losing track of time whenever she would start a new anime or video game. I did some quick math in my head. One Piece has over 1,100 episodes and each episode is around 24 minutes. I stared at Amy-chan in disbelief. Have you been staring at a TV screen for 18 days straight? I asked her. No. Amy-chan didn't sound very convincing when she said that. Tevos stood up from her table with wide eyes. 18 days. We need to get this girl to a medical clinic immediately. How is she even alive? That's when Amy-chan finally noticed there was someone else in the restaurant with us. Her eyes went wide when she spotted Counselor Tevos's very unique features. Hello? Amy-chan said to the other woman. Not to be rude, but what are you? Tevos's face scrunched up, probably over the fact that she was being asked that question 2 times in succession. She's an alien from another planet. Her species is known as Asari, I said with a smirk. Nanny. Amy-chan sputtered at me in disbelief. Her cool, elegant demeanor immediately slipped away. I cut off communication with the outside world for 18 days and there are aliens now. So you did stare at a TV for 18 days straight. I gazed at her judgmentally. Even for a goddess that technically doesn't need sleep, that can't be healthy, purely for her own sanity. I felt a tiny bit of pain when Amy-chan kicked me in the shin. Forget about that. I just want to know what is going on here. I would also like to know, Tevos added. I am very confused. Lord Babymort, Lord Voldemort had suffered some humiliating defeats in the past, but nothing compared to his current situation. He had been reduced to inhabiting the body of an actual baby. The Dark Lord, who once inspired fear in all who heard his name, now had to rely on that pathetic excuse for a servant, Wormtail, for his every need. Whether it was being fed mush or, most degrading of all, being cleaned up after soiling himself, Voldemort endured it all in silence, his rage festering deep within. Once he regained his body, he would obliviate every single memory of these humiliating months. My lord, I need to speak with you right away. I have urgent news. The voice of Barty Crouch Jr. echoed through the small, dimly lit room. Barty slipped inside, looking nervous. Nagini, coiled by Voldemort's crib, hissed at the intruder, her tongue flicking as if ready to strike. But she held back, knowing better than to attack without her master's orders. Voldemort's blood-red eyes fixed on Barty. Even as a baby, his gaze was enough to make most men tremble. Why are you here, Barty? Voldemort asked in a high-pitched, squeaky voice he despised. The sound grated on him every time he spoke. Don't you know how risky visiting me is at this stage in our plans? Barty flinched under Voldemort's gaze, and despite his current state, the Dark Lord found a small bit of amusement in the fear he still commanded. I'm sorry, my lord, Barty stammered, bowing low. But this is important. Something incredibly strange has happened at Hogwarts, and it concerns the Potter boy. At the mention of Harry Potter, Voldemort's small, frail body stiffened. His hatred for the boy was the one thing that kept him going through this indignity. Speak, Barty, Voldemort commanded. What news do you bring me? Barty swallowed hard before continuing. My lord, a strange restaurant has appeared in Hogsmeade. It's run by a magical beast of some kind. But that's not all. The restaurant has attracted even more powerful, strange beings to it. One of them, a vampire woman, has taken an interest in Potter and his mudblood friend. She's offered to take them on as magical apprentices. Voldemort's tiny hands gripped the sides of his crib, his small fingers tightening into fists. A vampire, he hissed. And Potter accepted? Barty nodded quickly. Yes, my lord. But it gets worse. Potter has shown remarkable growth in power under her tutelage. During the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, Potter used wandless lightning magic to kill the dragon. Voldemort's breath caught in his throat, and if his infant body were capable of sweating, he might have felt it trickle down his forehead. He could scarcely believe what he was hearing. Harry Potter had managed to kill one of the most dangerous magical creatures in existence and didn't even need a wand to do it. What the fuck? Voldemort muttered under his breath. When he was Potter's age, he was powerful, yes, but not even close to that powerful. And this had happened after only a few weeks of training under that vampire? What kind of ancient and terrifying being was she? Worse, what would Potter be capable of by the time the third task arrived? Voldemort's mind raced. If Potter's growth continued unchecked, would Voldemort even be able to survive another duel with the teenager? We might need a new plan, Voldemort admitted. But before that, we need to know more about this mysterious restaurant. He turned his gaze back to Barty. Barty swallowed nervously, avoiding Voldemort's gaze. Apologies, my lord, but, my persona as Mad-Eye Moody has been permanently banned from the restaurant. I can't return to investigate further. For a moment, the room was deadly silent. A scowl broke out on Voldemort's tiny face as his infant body shook with rage. He fumbled in his crib, desperately reaching for his wand, but it was just out of reach. A few bloody inches too far from his stubby fingers. Barty, sensing the imminent danger, flinched back, waiting for the inevitable curse. "You, incompetent fool," Voldemort spat, his high-pitched voice filled with venom. "You failed me." His eyes burned with fury, but without his wand, Barty was safe from the Cruciatus, for now. "Contact Lucius," Voldemort finally hissed. "Bring him before me. We'll need to craft a new plan. And this time, Barty, do not fail me." Barty bowed low, trembling as he backed out of the room. "Yes, my lord." "Right away." As Barty disappeared, Voldemort seethed in his crib. "This restaurant and the magical beast have ruined my plans. This will not stand. I will have vengeance," he declared. The Dark Lord vowed he would learn everything he could about this place, and when the time came, he would crush it, along with anyone who dared to stand in his way. But first, he needed his body back. "Wormtail. I made a messy. Come and change me." Voldemort yelled furiously. "Someone made a dawdaw. I had a couple people request that I add Friarin, and I don't mind, but it will probably take a couple chapters first. I have a Patreon. My subs can read advanced updates of my stories ahead of standard release and vote on story polls. Link, patreon.com/StarWaves Chapter 13, An Average Day at the Foxhole. "Haru, here's your tea, Mamanga," I said, placing the steaming cup in front of the living skeleton. According to him, he was an undead known as an overlord, which was basically the magical king of skeletons. Yeah, his world was weird. But weird was the new normal around here. "Thank you, Haru," the skeleton replied, elegantly picking up the teacup with two bony fingers. He brought it to his lips, well, where his mouth should have been, and somehow managed to make sipping noises. I didn't even bother questioning it at this point. "I'd like to thank you for saving some of those prisoners for us," Mamanga said after a slight pause. "In my zeal the other day, I ended up killing all the magic casters that invaded your territory, Haru," he admitted with a slightly embarrassed tone. Albedo, who sat next to him, frowned deeply. Her golden eyes glinted with disdain as she crossed her arms. "Humph. Those pathetic worms should have considered themselves honored to die by your divine hand, my love." Her voice dripped with fervent adoration and pride. "All right," Mamanga stuttered slightly, shifting awkwardly in his seat. He cleared his throat, or at least made a sound resembling it. "That reminds me, Haru. I've decided to change my name. From now on, I am no longer Mamanga. I am Ainz Albedo." "At least you picked a cool-sounding new name," I said with a chuckle. "Have you given more thought to my offer, Ainz?" I added. Ainz glanced at me, then at Albedo, who was sitting next to him. "What offer is that, my love?" Albedo asked curiously. Ainz hesitated for a moment before explaining. "Haru offered to find someone who could teach me transformation magic," he said, his voice carrying a hint of awkwardness. "It would allow me to take on a humanoid, fleshy form." Albedo's eyes lit up with pure, unbridled excitement, her cheeks flushing as her breathing became heavier. "Such a thing is truly possible," she exclaimed. She turned toward me, almost trembling. "You will have my eternal gratitude if you make this happen, Lord Haru. I cannot wait to be able to lie with my beloved Ainz for real." She clasped her hands together, her golden eyes practically sparkling with lust. "The sounds of our passionate lovemaking will echo throughout the halls of Nazarick for hours upon hours. Shaltir will be so incredibly jealous when I rub it into her undead face that I'm pregnant with our child." Albedo turned back to Ainz. "What should we name it if it's a boy? Or maybe it will be a girl?" She blinked up at him, waiting eagerly for his response. I just stared from where I stood behind the counter. Albedo really wanted that D. Somehow, despite being a skeleton, Ainz managed to look utterly horrified, or at least, as close to horrified as a skull could get. His red eyes flickered in panic. Please, calm yourself, Albedo, he said, his voice faltering slightly. I haven't even started learning transformation magic yet. Albedo pouted, her excitement faltering for just a moment, and she let out an adorable little huff, crossing her arms. Humph. But you will learn it, right, Ainz-sama? She pressed, her voice laced with impatience. Ainz shifted awkwardly, looking like he regretted everything. We'll see. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Of course, my beloved. Albedo's mood shifted back in an instant, her eyes filled with renewed determination. I'll wait for as long as it takes. Our love knows no bounds. The conversation shifted as Ainz leaned forward, his glowing red eyes focused intently on me. Haru, he began, what's the strangest thing you've seen in the other dimensions your restaurant has connected to? I paused, thinking it over. Well, I haven't seen it yet, but yesterday, my restaurant connected to a place called the Citadel. It's located in deep space and is run by a bunch of aliens. Ainz had just taken another sip of his tea when he spat it all out of his bony mouth in shock. The tea splashed all over Albedo. Instead of looking upset, Albedo's eyes lit up, and she giggled, wiping the tea from her face while panting with that lecherous expression. Ainz-sama, she purred, her voice full of delight, if you wanted to get me wet all you had to do was ask. Succubi were weird, or maybe it was just Ainz's girl that was special. Ainz, ignoring Albedo's reaction, looked at me in disbelief. Aliens? Such things actually exist. Yeah, I replied with a chuckle. And they're pretty hot, too. The Aseri, which is the alien species I met, are all beautiful blue women. They're also monogendered, which is pretty interesting. Ainz tilted his skull curiously. Then how do they? He trailed off awkwardly, his bony fingers tapping lightly against the table. How do they make more Aseri? I grinned. I have no idea yet. That would have been a pretty awkward thing to ask during first contact. I laughed, shaking my head at the memory. What made it even funnier was that the goddess Amaterasu decided to pay my restaurant a visit while I was talking to them. It freaked the alien out even more. Ainz's red eyes flared with interest. A goddess visited your restaurant during first contact with an alien race? What even is your life? Albedo, now mostly dry after using the towel I handed her, perked up as well. There are gods in your world, Lord Haru? She asked. Do you hunt them for sport like the supreme beings did back in Yggdrasil? I blinked at her. No. Albedo pouted slightly. I see. That's disappointing. It would have been quite thrilling, I imagine. I turned to Ainz, wanting to ask what the whole hunting gods thing was about, but he just told me that he would explain later. More customers were entering the foxhole anyways. Haru, my friend. 'Tis good to see you again. Agner's booming voice filled the restaurant as he walked in with his vampire wife, Sarana, close behind. He glanced around the room, noticing the unfamiliar faces of Ainz and Albedo seated nearby. I see you have some new and unusual customers, Agner added with a grin, casually plopping himself down at the bar counter next to them. The Dragonborn was just a big friendly nod. 'Tis nice to make your acquaintance. Agner said with a wide smile. I am Agner, and the lovely woman behind me is my wife, Sarana. He gave Sarana a playful nudge as she sighed softly, taking her seat beside him. Charmed. Sarana said, exchanging nods with Albedo. The two women seemed to size each other up for a moment before settling into the strange atmosphere. It is nice to meet you as well, Albedo replied, eyeing Sarana with mild interest before returning her attention to Ainz. What dimension do you come from? Ainz asked curiously, his voice echoing slightly. And what is your armor made of if I may ask? I've always thought black armor was the coolest looking, myself. Agner's grin widened even more as he patted Ainz on the shoulder. Thank you, my new undead friend. My armor is made from ebony, a very rare and expensive ore that can be mined in Skyrim, the home of the Nords, he said proudly. Ainz's eyes glowed with fascination. Ebony? Interesting. I've never heard of such a metal. Agner turned to me next, leaning in a bit. Saren and I just got back from another dragon subjugation quest. Falkreath was being threatened by a dragon that demanded human sacrifices every week, or it would burn the village to the ground. Thankfully we took care of it before it came to that. Ainz and Albedo were both lost, so I explained to them a bit about Agner's dimension. The dragons in Skyrim used to rule over the world before they were overthrown and all killed. But a while back, one of those dragons managed to resurrect itself from the dead and brought the rest of them back to life as well. Now they're causing havoc all over the place. Saren gave a slight nod. And if it's not a dragon causing trouble, then it's always something else equally insane. She added dryly. Ainz's red eyes flared with interest. You must be quite strong to routinely slay dragons, he said, his voice carrying a hint of admiration as he looked at Agner. Agner chuckled deeply, flexing his arms. It takes strength, but it also takes strategy. Dragons are crafty beasts. You've got to hit them where they're weakest, and make sure you've got a good weapon. He patted the hilt of his ebony sword. This beauty's helped me slay more than my fair share of M. Agner reached into the bag on his hip, which I only now realized was some kind of expanded storage pouch, much like the magical bags I'd seen before. He grinned widely at me, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Haru, my friend, I've brought a treat for you to prepare for lunch, he exclaimed, his voice booming as he began pulling out several large cuts of meat from the seemingly endless bag. At first glance, I couldn't tell what kind of animal the meat came from, and I leaned in, inspecting it curiously. What is this? I asked, my tail swaying behind me in excitement from the smell alone. This, my friend, is horker meat, the most succulent and delicious meat in all of Skyrim, he proclaimed proudly. Horker? I raised an eyebrow. What's a horker? Agner launched into a quick description, telling me that horkers were large, tusked creatures that lived in the icy waters of Skyrim. They sounded a bit like walruses, only more aggressive and larger. Their meat's the best, rich, tender, and full of flavor, he assured me. I nodded, intrigued. How do you cook them? I asked eagerly, feeling my tail sway even faster. The thought of preparing something new always got me excited, especially when it came highly recommended like this. Agner scratched his chin awkwardly, glancing at Saren. Well, you see. He began, clearly unsure. Saren let out a sigh and shot him a look of exasperation. Honestly, Agner, how have you survived all these years as an adventurer without knowing how to cook? She grumbled, shaking her head. That's what you're here for, love, Agner said with a sheepish smile, which earned him an eye roll from his vampire wife. Saren turned to me, crossing her arms. Horker meat is pretty much like cooking a steak, just thicker and more tender. Grill it a bit longer than your average T-bone, and it should turn out perfect, she explained, her tone more practical. Then, to my surprise, she added, it's one of the few meats I can actually ingest as a vampire, as long as it's extra rare. I blinked. Extra rare, huh? I smirked. That pretty much means I'm not going to be cooking it at all. Saren chuckled softly. Just wave it over the fire, Haru. That'll do. But no way was I just going to serve up raw meat. My pride as a chef was on the line here. I'll at least season it properly, I declared. No one's getting a bland cut of meat in my restaurant. I mentally ran through the list of spices I had on hand. Something earthy to complement the richness of the horker, maybe a bit of sea salt to enhance the natural flavors. Ainz and Albedo, who had been quietly enjoying their tea up until now, perked up at the mention of the steaks. Neither of them had ordered any food yet. Technically, Ainz didn't even need to eat, and Albedo had a ring that stopped her from feeling hunger altogether. Did you say steaks? Ainz asked, his glowing eyes locked on the cuts of horker meat on the counter. Albedo leaned forward eagerly. I'd like to try a cut as well. Even Nazric's great chefs cannot compare to Lord Haru's cooking. Agner chuckled heartily. No need to worry, friends. Horkers are very big creatures, I've brought more than enough for everyone. With that said, I immediately went to work. I fired up the grills and started seasoning all the meats. I filled a few pans with my homemade butter along with a few pinches of salt as well that I would sprinkle over the steaks to add that little bit of extra deliciousness. Agner had been right. The horker steaks were absolutely delicious, some of the juiciest, most tender cuts I'd ever prepared. Everyone seemed satisfied with their meals, including me. I had made myself a steak too, and as I chewed the rich, flavorful meat, I could tell this was a new favorite. While I started cleaning up the kitchen, I could hear Ainz and Agner chatting at the bar about weapons and minerals found in Skyrim. Saren had joined Albedo at a nearby table, and the two of them were deep in what could only be described as girl talk. What exactly do a female vampire and a succubus discuss when they think no one is listening? Well, judging by the things I heard, things that made my face flush red and my ears flop down in embarrassment, it wasn't exactly the kind of conversation I needed to overhear. I loved having enhanced senses as a kitsune, but sometimes superhearing was a curse. There were more than a few nights growing up where I could overhear my mother, Yasaka, satisfying herself, late at night in the palace through the thin walls. I finished cleaning up the kitchen and packed the leftover horker steaks neatly into the freezer, grateful for the distraction. The peace didn't last long, though. Just as I finished, the doors to my restaurant burst open with a loud bang. A woman with blue skin and long, pointed ears stormed in. She wasn't an Asari though. Her features were sharper, and I recognized her as a dark elf from Skyrim. Her intense red eyes locked onto Agner. Dragonborn, she called out urgently. Your assistance is immediately needed. 3 dragons are flying directly toward Whiterun. Agner and Ainz's conversation halted as the large Nord stood up, his expression turning serious in an instant. 3 at once, Irileth? He asked, his hand already reaching for the hilt of his sword. Irileth nodded grimly. Yes. It's an emergency. Her attention briefly shifted to the rest of the room, her gaze flickering with surprise as it moved between me, Ainz, and the others. When her eyes landed on me, a hint of recognition flashed in them. Hello, she said with a curt nod. My name is Irileth, and I am Jarl Balgruuf's personal guard. I apologize for not greeting you sooner. Things have been so chaotic in Skyrim that the Jarl hasn't had a chance to welcome you personally. I blinked. The Jarl knows who I am. Irileth nodded. Of course. All of Whiterun knows who you are, Lord Haru. The Dragonborn and Ela the Huntress both openly brag about you and your restaurant. Well, that's flattering, I said, scratching the back of my head, feeling a bit embarrassed by the sudden praise. Ainz, having listened quietly, spoke up, his voice calm but curious. 3 dragons at once. That sounds like quite the challenge. Do you plan to face them alone, Agner? Agner looked at Ainz, a determined smile on his face. Not alone, my new undead friend. I'll have Saren, Irileth, and some of Whiterun's finest soldiers at my side. But if you're offering your assistance, I wouldn't mind the help. Ainz's eyes glowed with interest. I believe this could be a valuable learning experience. I was tempted to join them. What the hell, I said, stepping out from behind the counter. As I walked over to join the group, I noticed a flicker of relief in Irileth's eyes, though she still kept glancing at Ainz with a wary expression. Ainz noticed her discomfort. If my appearance is unsettling, I could wear a mask to hide my features. I wouldn't want to make the people of Whiterun uneasy. Before Irileth could respond, Albedo hissed sharply, her golden eyes narrowing in displeasure. How dare you suggest that Ainz-sama should hide himself, she snapped, glaring at Irileth. Agner, however, laughed loudly, his booming voice cutting through the tension. What kind of pansy milk drinkers do you take us Nords for? He declared, slapping a hand against Ainz's bony shoulder. The true Nords won't be scared of you just because you're undead. We've seen worse. The Dragonborn wasn't biased against undead, after all he had married one. Serana smirked and placed a light kiss on Agnar's cheek. My man might be a big dumb lug who only knows how to shout and swing around a greatsword, but his heart's always in the right place. The people of Whiterun learned to accept me, and I'm sure they'll accept you in time as well. Ainz looked relieved to hear that. With that, we left my restaurant and stepped into the open streets of Whiterun. It was my second time seeing the city, the first being when I went out on my first date with Ela. Unlike that lively day, the streets were now deserted. Everyone had fled indoors, save for the soldiers and the brave members of the companions, who stood ready to defend the city. The distant sound of dragons roaring echoed over the mountains, but thanks to my enhanced hearing, I could tell those roars were getting closer, fast. We've got about 5 minutes, tops, before the dragons get here, I told everyone. Agnar gave a sharp nod of acknowledgement, while Ainz's red eyes glowed thoughtfully. How do we want to handle this? Ainz asked. Shall each of us take on a single dragon? I shrugged, rolling my shoulders to loosen up. I'm fine with that. Just let me keep the dragon's bones and meat after I take it down. Dragon meat is a delicacy in my restaurant, and it goes fast. The last batch I had from the dragon Harry killed had already sold out in just a few days. Agnar smirked. This is Skyrim, Haru. You keep whatever you kill obviously. As I stretched my arms, preparing for the impending battle, I overheard Irileth speaking in hushed tones with a few nearby guards. These people are insane, she muttered, her voice tinged with disbelief. They're discussing killing dragons so casually, and eating them. One of the guards beside her nodded. I've never heard of anyone eating a dragon before. I couldn't help but grin, my ears twitching as I turned to them. Trust me, I said, once you've had dragon steak, you'll understand. I tried to reassure them, but some of them still looked at me like I was insane. They'd catch on. Suddenly, a loud roar cut through the air, much closer than before. I could feel the vibrations through the ground as 3 massive shadows swept over the mountains, heading straight for Whiterun. The dragons were nearly here. Agnar unsheathed his ebony greatsword, his eyes shining with the thrill of battle. Time to show these beasts why they fear the Dragonborn, he shouted. Ainz raised a hand, dark magic crackling between his skeletal fingers. Let's see if these creatures are formidable enough to face Ainz Ulgaun. I summoned a bit of foxfire, letting the blue flames flicker at my fingertips. Alright, boys and girls, let's make this quick. I've got a restaurant to run, I said with a grin. Kunu-sama. Please slow down. Your brother's restaurant isn't going anywhere. Tanya-chan called out. Kuna darted through the streets of Kyoto, her face lighting up with a big, happy smile. It was the best time of the day, lunchtime. That meant an hour away from her tutors and a chance to see her awesome big brother at his restaurant. She could hear Tanya, her bodyguard, panting behind her, trying to keep up as she zigzagged through the crowded streets while barely avoiding colliding with startled yokai. Those who recognized her just chuckled and cheered her on as she ran. Finally, Kunu reached the fox hole, bursting through the doors with excitement. I'm here, Haruniken, she sing-songed. But as she looked around the empty restaurant, her smile faded into a pout. Huh? Where is everyone? She sniffed the air, her keen senses picking up the lack of her brother's usual scent. Ah! She muttered, realizing that Haru was gone. A few seconds later, Tanya caught up, her blonde hair a bit disheveled. The 13-year-old leaned forward, planting her hands on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. You're so fast, on the ground. Haru's not here, Kunu complained. Tanya straightened up, glancing around the quiet restaurant. Maybe he went to see one of his girlfriends? Tanya suggested with a shrug. Kunu pouted again, stamping her foot on the wooden floor. He can make kissy faces with his girlfriends later. I'm hungry now. As if on cue, her stomach growled loudly. Tanya smiled faintly. Maybe he's still nearby. If we check one of the dimensions, okay. Let's check Skyrim first. Kunu declared immediately. She closed the door, picturing Whiterun in her mind, and then flung the door back open. The moment the door opened, a deafening roar filled the air, followed by the ground-shaking boom of something heavy crashing nearby. Kunu's eyes lit up. I found Niken, she said happily, completely ignoring the chaos as she sprinted through the streets of Whiterun. Behind her, Tanya's panicked shouts followed, but Kunu was too focused. She could smell her brother now. He was just outside the city, and from the sounds of it, he was fighting a dragon. So cool. Kunu whispered to herself as she hopped up one of the ramps leading to the city's edge. There, she saw a group of soldiers watching the battle intently. A dark elf woman stood at the front, barking orders. Agner, Haru, and Ainz look like they're winning, but keep those arrows ready in case one of the dragons tries to get past them and attack Whiterun itself, the dark elf commanded. Yes, ma'am, several soldiers saluted, gripping their bows tightly. Kunu walked right up behind the dark elf and tapped her shoulder. Hi there. Why's my brother fighting a dragon? She asked. The dark elf jumped, startled, before quickly spinning around to face Kunu. She stared down at the small girl with a mixture of shock and concern, then quickly placed her hands on her hips. What are you doing out here, child? This is no place for you. Kunu puffed out her cheeks, her tail swishing behind her in frustration. I want to see Haru fight the dragon, she complained, not understanding why anyone would keep her from watching something so cool. Tanya finally caught up, her face flushed from running again so soon after catching her breath. Kunu-sama, please. You can't just run into battlefields. I'm not on a battlefield. Kunu pointed fiercely outside the city walls. The battlefield is out there. Her eyes gleamed with excitement as she watched her brother conjure a massive plume of blue foxfire and hurl it at the red dragon. The resulting explosion shook everything around them, and Kunu gasped in delight. But her joy quickly turned to anger when the dragon roared in a language she couldn't understand and struck Haru with a bolt of lightning that appeared out of nowhere. Kunu's fur bristled as she growled, her small fists clenched. How dare you hurt my big brother, you stupid lizard! I'll kill you! She made a move to hop over the ledge, ready to charge into the fray, but Tanya swiftly grabbed her and pulled her back. Tanya sighed in exasperation. Haru is fine, Kunu-sama. Look, see? All that lightning did was give him a little jolt, he's already retaliating. Kunu's angry expression shifted back into a grin as she watched Haru leap into the air, dozens of feet high, and punch the dragon square in the face. The massive beast struggled to stay airborne after the blow and crashed down into the dirt with a thunderous impact. It looks like it's almost over, Irileth said with a sigh of relief. All three dragons have now been grounded. Kunu pouted as Tanya finally released her. She crossed her arms. I wanted to help. First, I miss out on fighting zombies, and now I don't get to fight any dragons either. Tanya chuckled and gave her a pat on the head. It's not over yet, she said, glancing at Irileth. My name is Tanya Degurchev. I'm Lady Kunu's bodyguard, and playmate, she added with a hint of reluctance, earning a giggle from Kunu. Tanya always acted so serious, but she was fun to tease. Irileth smiled slightly. It's fine. I've heard tales of Haru's family from Ila herself. I knew what to expect. Thankfully, the danger seems to have passed. Agner has slain his dragon, and the undead, Ainz, has almost finished his as well. Tanya tilted her head curiously. Why were 3 dragons attacking this place in the first place? Irileth frowned, shaking her head. I don't know. Maybe it's vengeance against the Dragonborn himself. Agner's known to live in Whiterun most of the time. Regardless, it is safe now, and I'm sure the streets will soon be full of Nords celebrating long into the night. Kunu's face brightened at the word celebrate. I want to go to a party, she exclaimed. Tanya smiled indulgently. I'm sure your mother will let you go, as long as you don't stay out too late. But just as they relaxed, a deafening roar echoed from the other side of the city. Ireletha's eyes widened in panic as a fourth dragon appeared out of nowhere, soaring over the mountains toward Whiterun. Shit, there's another one. Ireleth shouted. Some of the guards nearby began to panic, but Ireleth quickly barked orders to keep them calm. Hold your ground. Kunu puffed out her chest and declared, Don't worry, everyone. I'll slay this dragon, just like my brother. The guards stared at her in disbelief, but before Kunu could take another step, Tanya stepped in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder. No, Kunu-sama, you will not be fighting any dragons on my watch, she said firmly, unslinging the rifle from her back. I will take care of this one. Ireleth raised an eyebrow, glancing at Tanya doubtfully. No offense, but aren't you a bit young to be fighting dragons? You're not much bigger than Lord Haru's sister. Kunu giggled at the mortified look that crossed Tanya's face. I'll show you who's small. Tanya muttered under her breath. With a determined look, she took off into the sky, flying high above the city as magic circles formed in front of her rifle. Kunu watched in awe as Tanya began chanting that strange, math-based magic she always used. Then, with a sharp crack, Tanya pulled the trigger, and Kunu had to cover her ears as a deafening boom split the air. A massive explosion erupted in the sky, and the dragon's roar was cut off mid-sound. Kunu, with her enhanced vision, spotted the dragon's body tumbling out of the cloud of smoke. Even from this distance, she could see it was missing most of its head. Whoa! Kunu whispered in admiration. Tanya had blown the dragon's head clean off. By the gods! Ireleth breathed. I stand corrected. Kunu grinned proudly. See? Tanya-chan is the best. She looked up as Tanya floated back down toward them. Modern guns work so much better. Tanya muttered to herself as she landed on the ground. She then let out an adorable yelp when the nearby guards all picked her up and started cheering. They also decided to pick Kunu up as well, and she giggled as they started parading the little dragon slayer and her friend up and down the streets of Whiterun. Chapter 14, A Party and a Space Hero. Harry Potter. Harry and Hermione hadn't been at the foxhole for the past few days. After Harry had completed the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, they had been drowning in schoolwork. They had skipped weeks of classes while training with Serana in Skyrim, and now Hermione, ever the diligent student, was determined to catch up. Harry technically didn't need to, Triwizard champions were exempt from schoolwork, but he couldn't abandon his new girlfriend to the pile of essays and assignments they had missed out on all by her lonesome. The atmosphere at Hogwarts had been tense ever since Harry electrocuted a dragon to death during the task. Teachers and students alike seemed nervous around him, shooting wary glances his way whenever he passed through the corridors. Even Dumbledore had been acting strangely. The headmaster would stare at Harry during meals, and Harry found it more than a little creepy. The old man looked at him like he was already the next Dark Lord, waiting to seize the castle at the first opportunity and strike down Dumbledore. Well, half of that was true at least. Harry loathed Dumbledore after everything the headmaster had put him through, but he had no desire to be a Dark Lord or rule over magical Britain. After spending time in Skyrim, the idea of ruling over a place as small-minded as Britain seemed laughable. The witches and wizards, with all their potential, still somehow managed to limit themselves in almost every possible way. I mean, who spends 7 years learning magic only to end up at a desk job in the ministry? Harry muttered under his breath, flipping through his potions textbook and cursing Snape for assigning so many worthless essays. Hermione glanced up from her essay, frowning slightly. A lot of people. Not everyone has the option to be, well, you. Exactly, Harry said, smirking a little. Why waste all that magical training just to push papers for the rest of your life? You should be out there doing something incredible with your magic. Remember when you used to think the ministry was the dream job? Hermione rolled her eyes, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. I was misguided. You mean Serena knocked some sense into you, Harry teased. She did not knock sense into me, Harry, Hermione protested, though her smile betrayed her. She just broadened my perspective. Harry chuckled. Broadened it, huh? How about we broaden it some more and get out of this stuffy castle? I need some good food. Harry complained as he stood up. Hermione thankfully agreed that they both needed a break from all the assignments, and the two of them left the castle. Well, I'm just glad you're not aiming for some boring job managing cauldron thickness or sending threatening letters to children for accidental magic anymore. Harry said as they walked, continuing their conversation. Hermione huffed, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Cauldron thickness is actually important, because scammers were selling thinner cauldrons to save money and potions across Britain were being sabotaged. Fair enough, Harry said, raising his hands in mock surrender. But that's never going to be my problem. I want magic to be my focus, not paperwork. He glanced up at the overcast sky as they made their way through Hogsmeade. After spending time in Skyrim, everything here just seems small. Wizards don't even know how much more there is out there. Magic can do so much more than what they teach us at Hogwarts. Hermione looked thoughtful, resting her chin on her hand. You're right. There's so much untapped potential. It's a bit frustrating, really. Frustrating? Harry grinned. It's downright depressing. But at least we're free of it. We've got options. Hermione smiled softly. We do. And I'm grateful for that. It's just hard to believe sometimes, isn't it? How much has changed? Harry nodded, his thoughts drifting. Everything had changed for him, from his understanding of magic to his relationships. Harry and Hermione arrived outside the doors of the Foxhole. I can't wait to try some of Haru's cooking again, she said. Harry nodded in agreement, his stomach growling at the thought. Haru's food was always incredible. When they opened the doors, however, they were met with a scene that neither of them had expected. The place was packed, filled with laughter, shouting, and the clink of mugs. The lively crowd was celebrating enthusiastically, their boisterous cheers almost drowning out the music playing in the background. It was clear that another party was in full swing. Looks like Haru's throwing another party, Harry muttered, a bit of a pout forming on his lips. Why didn't he invite us? Hermione chuckled, nudging him playfully. It's probably another spur-of-the-moment thing, like last time. Besides, remember what Professor McGonagall said after the last party? She doesn't want either of us getting drunk again. Harry grimaced at the memory. The stern look McGonagall had given them the morning after was enough to make sure they wouldn't be getting into the mead again anytime soon. Still, he couldn't help but feel a little left out. The restaurant was mostly filled with people from Skyrim, their hearty voices echoing off the walls as they knocked back cups of mead and cheered loudly about the 4 heroes who had slain dragons. Harry's ears perked up at that. Slaying dragons? Harry raised an eyebrow, still unsure of what was going on. That's when he spotted someone familiar standing by the front door. Tanya, the 13-year-old girl they had gotten to know recently whenever she stopped by with Kunu. She was standing there with her arms crossed, looking like she was pouting about something. Hey, Tanya. Hermione greeted with a friendly wave as they approached her. Harry followed suit, giving her a small smile. What's going on? Why is everyone celebrating? Tanya huffed, her cheeks puffed out slightly in irritation. They're all celebrating because 4 dragons were slain before they could burn Whiterun to the ground. 4 dragons at once? Harry asked in surprise. That explains the 4 heroes everyone's cheering about. Who killed the dragons? I'm guessing Agner and probably Haru. Who else? Before Tanya could respond, a drunken Nord stumbled over to them, holding up his mug in a toast. Hooray for the little dragon slayer, he bellowed jovially in Tanya's direction before staggering away, laughing. Tanya's pout deepened as she crossed her arms tighter, grumbling under her breath. "I'm not little," she muttered, clearly annoyed by the Nord's comment. "Wait," he said, putting two and two together. "You're one of the heroes, aren't you?" Tanya shot him a glare. "Of course I am. I wanted to test out my new modern gun and keep Kunu from running off and fighting the dragon herself." She gave them a rundown on everything that happened after she followed Kunu to Skyrim earlier. She eventually ended the story by grumbling about how the soldiers paraded her up and down Whiterun multiple times, and wouldn't stop calling her anything except the little dragon slayer. Harry and Hermione couldn't help but both chuckle at the nickname. Harry didn't think it was so bad compared to the other names students in Hogwarts had whispered behind his back over the years. "You mentioned Kunu earlier," Hermione asked Tanya. "Where is she?" "She's sleeping off a sugar crash and a stomach ache in the back," Tanya explained while gesturing behind the bar. Haru made a giant chocolate cake in the shape of a dragon and Kunu ended up eating almost her entire body weight in sugar. "I'm pretty sure if she was human, she would be in the hospital right now," Tanya said while shaking her head. "What is going on here?" Harry and Hermione both spun around when they heard a woman shout behind them. "Commander Shepard, how does it feel being an official Spectre now, Shepard?" Ashley asked as they rode the painfully slow elevator down to the Presidium. Commander Shepard shook her head, letting out a sigh. "It hasn't quite sunk in yet. I'm not even sure if this new position is anything more than a fancy title. Not with what Saren's up to. Being a Spectre will definitely have its perks," Gurus chimed in, crossing his arms. "You'll get access to the best intel and equipment in the galaxy. Might come in handy. And you can break a bunch of laws without getting in any trouble," Rex added with a chuckle, his deep voice echoing in the cramped space. "Damn, this elevator is slow," he grumbled, glaring at the doors. "Do you think the Protheans got motion sickness or something?" Ashley asked, smirking. "Every elevator based on their tech moves like molasses." "That's as good a theory as any I've heard," Tali remarked, her voice muffled slightly by her helmet. "You humans are always in such a hurry," Gurus said with a small laugh. "I'm in a hurry to get a drink," Rex muttered, casting an impatient glance at the floor indicator as it finally hit their stop. The doors slid open slowly, revealing the gleaming walkway of the Presidium. "Do you think I can get an actual decent drink around here?" Shepard stepped out of the elevator, her thoughts trailing after Rex's comment. She could use a drink herself. Tracking down Saren was going to be a long, dangerous mission, and she wasn't sure how many chances they'd get to unwind along the way. As she scanned the familiar surroundings, something caught her eye. "Hey, what's that?" she asked, pointing across the artificial river that ran through the heart of the Presidium. Was that place always there? Across the bridge, nestled between sleek Presidium towers, stood a building that seemed out of place. It had a warm, inviting glow, and a sign in both English and Japanese letters, the Fox Hole. Shepard chuckled at the name. "We might as well check it out. Plus, Rex is already halfway there," Ashley added with a smirk. Shepard blinked in surprise. Sure enough, Rex was already stomping his way across the bridge, his massive form surprisingly stealthy for a Krogan. Shaking her head in amusement, she motioned for the others to follow and hurried after him, her team trailing behind. As they approached the building, Tali tilted her head. "It looks like some kind of restaurant or bar. But I can't see anything through the windows." Shepard tried peeking in, but Tali was right, there was something off about the glass. Shrugging, she pushed open the door. The moment the door swung open, a wave of noise hit them. Inside, the place was packed with people, all drinking and celebrating as though it were the wildest night of their lives. Music blared, voices boomed in laughter and cheers, and the atmosphere felt utterly out of sync with the usual pristine calm of the Presidium. Rex's grin stretched wide as he looked around. Finally, a place on this stuck-up station that's not for pansies. I bet they've got some real drinks in here. Shepard stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The decor was warm, rustic, and inviting, like a mix between an old Earth tavern and something out of a fantasy novel. But what stood out the most were the 3 human children standing right by the front door. She frowned. This was supposed to be a bar. There were people everywhere, and they were all clearly drinking alcohol. Kids shouldn't be anywhere near this. What the hell is going on here? Shepard demanded, her voice sharp as she addressed the children. 2 of them jumped in fright, but the third, a small blonde girl, barely glanced her way. Shepard stared in bewilderment. "Isn't this a bar?" she asked, turning to her team. "Sure looks like one," Gurus said, eyeing the crowd. Tali tilted her head. "Maybe they allow families. Kids in a bar." Shepard shook her head, stepping closer to the children. "Hey, is there an adult here with any of you?" she asked the human kids. No," the boy replied, his messy black hair falling into his bright green eyes behind round glasses. He sounded confused, as if sneaking into a bar wasn't what they were doing at all. Shepard let out a deep sigh. It wasn't exactly how she imagined her evening going, dealing with kids in a bar wasn't on the agenda. She had just wanted a drink, not to play cop. She glanced over at Gurus, the ex-CSEC officer, and had an idea. She could leave it all up to him. She was the leader of the team and she needed to start delegating anyway. Gurus caught her playful look and sighed. "All right, you 3. Party's over," Gurus stepped forward, putting on his best authoritative tone. "You're coming with me." At least, that's what he thought would happen. Just as he reached for the group, the cute blonde girl, who had been quiet up until now, calmly stood up. In one smooth motion, she pulled out an old-fashioned assault rifle and aimed it directly at Gurus' face. "Touch us, and I'll blow your head off," the girl said, her voice cold and flat. Shepard's eyes widened in shock. This girl wasn't just some kid, there was something dangerous behind those blue eyes. This girl was a trained killer. Before Shepard could react, Rex burst into loud, booming laughter. "Ha ha ha. I didn't know human children were so awesome. What's your name, girl?" "I'm Erdnot Rex, mercenary and badass Krogan." The girl grinned, and for a second, her steely demeanor broke as she leaned her assault rifle against the wall. Gurus, still a little shaken, let out a small sigh of relief before giving Shepard a pleading look. Shepard waved him off, signaling for him to stand down. The girl gave a sharp, almost military salute. "I am former Lieutenant Colonel Tanya de Evil. Now, I'm simply Tanya de Evil, bodyguard for Kunisama." Shepard blinked in disbelief. "Former colonel? Bodyguard? What the hell is going on with this little girl?" Before Shepard could process any of that, the boy with glasses snickered. "Don't forget little dragon slayer," he teased, earning him a swift kick to the shin from Tanya. "Ow," the boy yelped, rubbing his leg. "I'm Harry Potter," he said, introducing himself as if nothing had happened. "And this is Hermione Granger." Shepard raised an eyebrow at that. It had been a while since she'd been back to Earth, but she still recognized British accents. "You know," Ashley said, arms crossed, "kids aren't really supposed to hang out in bars." "It's not usually a bar," Hermione explained, sounding a bit defensive. "Well, it is, but it's mostly a restaurant. Sometimes Haru throws wild parties, but none of us have had any drinks ourselves." "I don't even like alcohol," Tanya added, matter-of-factly. "I only drink water and coffee." Shepard shook her head, still trying to make sense of it all. "Is Haru the owner?" The 3 kids nodded and pointed toward the bar. Shepard followed their gaze and had to do a double take. The man behind the bar was serving drinks and food to a rowdy group of partygoers. He was handsome, to say the least, but that wasn't what truly caught Shepard's attention. No, it was the fact that he looked like something straight out of an anime, with fox-like ears poking through his golden hair and multiple tails swishing behind him as he worked. "Those ears and tails, they can't be real," Shepard muttered under her breath. They are, Harry said with a grin. He's a kitsune. A fox yokai. You'll all get used to it, he said with a shrug. I've never heard of kitsune, Tali said. What planet are they from? Shepard spared a glance with Ashley. They both knew the answer to that question and also knew it was impossible because yokai weren't real. She was going to get to the bottom of whatever was going on in this strange restaurant. She was supposed to leave the Citadel soon to chase after Saren, but she wasn't going anywhere until this was solved. Haru, I stood behind the bar, grinning as the lively crowd celebrated. The noise was deafening, but it was the good kind of loud, the sound of people letting loose and enjoying themselves. Albedo was standing on top of a table, swaying slightly as she raised a large wooden mug of mead in the air. A little bit of it splashed down her white dress, but she didn't seem to care. I just wanna say, Albedo began, her speech slurred, her face bright red from all the mead she'd consumed. I always thought humans were lower life forms. But you guys are all right. Especially since you all can see how glorious Mamanga, Ainz-sama is. Isn't he the best? A chorus of cheers erupted from the drunken Nords around her, their mugs raised high as they echoed her sentiment. I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw Ainz, his skeletal face showing what I could only assume was embarrassment, facepalming at the spectacle. He kept trying to get Albedo off the table, but the drunken succubus wasn't having any of it. She stayed up there and kept giving speeches about how great and magnificent her darling Ainz was. I love you so much, Ainz-sama. You looked so cool when you killed that dragon. Kanpai. Albedo shouted before downing the rest of her drink, the Nords cheering louder. Agner had been right, Whiterun's people had come to accept Ainz and the undead, especially after he saved them from one of the dragons that had attacked the city. It didn't hurt that Albedo, in her own way, was charming them with her enthusiasm. I scanned the rest of the bar, wondering what other chaos was unfolding. It didn't take long for me to spot another commotion. How dare you steal the last piece of chocolate cake? Haru was saving that for me. Ila's voice rang out as she drunkenly dove forward, tackling Agner to the floor in a blur of movement. The two of them rolled around, wrestling like children, their laughter mixing with the shouts of those egging them on. Serana rushed over, exasperated, trying to pull them apart. Ila, Agner, seriously, get up. You're going to hurt yourselves. I couldn't help but chuckle at the scene, leaning against the bar. When in doubt, always cheer for your girlfriend. Kick his ass, Ila. I called out. Ila, who was clearly drunk but not as far gone as Agner, threw a triumphant fist into the air. I shall best the Dragonborn this night. Serana shot me an annoyed glare, clearly not amused that I wasn't helping her break it up. I shrugged back at her. I couldn't help anyway, there were more customers to deal with, and besides, Ila had things under control. Probably. A striking redhead slid onto one of the few empty bar stools at the bar. Her very form-fitting armor was clearly futuristic, and she was absolutely armed to the teeth. I spotted at least 4 guns and even more grenades around that slender waist. I had kept my drinking under control tonight, but that didn't mean I hadn't had a few, and before I could stop myself, the words flew out of my mouth. Well, hello there, beautiful. Welcome to the Foxhole. I'm Haru, the owner. What can I get for you? The redhead pursed her lips, her sharp gaze scanning the room. Do you know there are children here? Kids aren't allowed in bars under Citadel law. Ah, she was from the space dimension then. I wondered if she was some kind of law enforcement, given how serious she sounded. I was about to respond when another woman, a pretty, Hispanic girl, sat down next to her at the counter, eyeing me curiously. She had the air of someone who had seen her fair share of battles, much like the redhead. I gave her the same greeting, though with a little less flirtatiousness this time. Welcome to the Foxhole. What can I get you, The Hispanic woman nodded curtly. I'm Gunnery Chief Ashley Williams, Alliance Military, she introduced herself. The redhead gave me a measured look. Commander Shepard. Same deal, except I'm also a council spectre. It looked like I was dealing with military types. I straightened up a bit, trying to take them more seriously. Nice to meet you both. And yes, I'm aware there are kids here. None of them will be getting alcohol, this time. A trio of aliens soon joined the Two Systems Alliance soldiers at the bar, their presence unmistakable. One of them, the largest, grinned toothily at me. Give me the strongest shit you have, furry human, the massive alien, who called himself Trainwrecks, declared with a gravelly voice. I shrugged, hiding a grin as I reached for my special stash. Rex didn't know what he was getting himself into. I poured him a blend of Kappa sake, known for its potency, and some fire whiskey I'd picked up in Hogsmeade. The glass I handed him was the size of a pitcher, sized appropriately for a Krogan, who claimed to have an iron stomach. But this would knock him flat. The name's Haru, not furry human, I said with a wink. Welcome to the foxhole, Rex. Rex took the glass and started downing the drink like a man on a mission. After a few hefty gulps, he choked for a second, his eyes widening. Then he let out a booming laugh. Now that's some good shit right there. I like you, Haru. The other two aliens introduced themselves, clearly not wanting to be left out of the conversation. Tali, the Quarian in the containment suit, explained that she couldn't eat or drink due to her suit's strict filtration system, which was a shame. Meanwhile, Gurus, the Turian, didn't order anything at all. He simply sat at the bar, arms crossed, throwing me the occasional distrustful look. Once I finished handling the trio of aliens, I turned my attention back to the two women, Ashley and Shepard, who were watching everything unfold with growing confusion. What the hell is this place? Ashley asked, her voice rising with a mix of awe and suspicion. She gestured to the room, her eyes jumping from one oddity to another. Why does that woman over there have horns and wings? And is that a giant cat person? Also, holy shit, there's a guy who's just a straight-up skeleton. I could tell they were both overwhelmed, so I leaned in with a smile, ready to give them the same rundown I'd given countless other new customers. This restaurant is technically located in another dimension. It's its own sovereign territory aboard the Citadel, approved by the Council, of course. Shepard looked at me like I just told her the moon was made of cheese. You're saying the Council approved this? She gestured at the wild scene around us, clearly skeptical. It was understandable, most people needed some time to digest it. Yep, I replied, unfazed. Counselor Tevos is actually a regular here. She usually stops by for lunch when things are a bit quieter. Shepard blinked, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. I don't fucking believe this. She rubbed her temple as I poured her a shot of whiskey. I thought the galaxy was already crazy enough. Ashley, on the other hand, seemed to be wrestling with a different kind of disbelief. As we got a few drinks in her, she loosened up and leaned across the bar, narrowing her eyes at me. You know, as some kind of pagan demon, I'm supposed to hate you, she mumbled, swirling her drink. If you're actually whatever you say you are. I chuckled, leaning casually against the bar. I've met Gabriel before, and she didn't seem to hate me. Why should you? That got Shepard's attention. She raised an eyebrow at me. Gabriel who? She asked, before knocking back another shot. The Archangel Gabriel, of course, I said casually. That's when Shepard immediately started choking on her whiskey, coughing and sputtering as she processed what I'd just said. Ashley's eyes lit up like fireworks. Wait, the actual Archangel Gabriel? The one from the Bible, she asked, her tone a mix of excitement and disbelief. The very same, I confirmed, watching as they both stared at me. Isn't Gabriel supposed to be a man? Ashley asked. She then started fiddling with her Omni tool and pulled up an electronic copy of the Bible. Yeah, she was one of those people. Probably a mistranslation. I shrugged. Before I could explain anything further, a loud bang echoed from the entrance. The doors slammed open, and 5 men in black robes, wearing silver masks, stormed into the restaurant. I immediately recognized them as wizards because of their glowing wands. "Alright, you disgusting creature. We're here to teach you a lesson on behalf of Lucius Malfoy," the lead wizard declared, his voice full of arrogance. Before anyone could react, one of the masked men behind him smacked him on the back of the head. "What the hell, you moron. You're not supposed to tell people that. He told us to be discreet when he hired us." "Discreet?" The leader spun around, clearly irritated, and the two began arguing. "Then why the hell did that rich arse give us these Death Eater robes if we were supposed to be discreet?" The second man groaned. "He wanted us to send a message, that freaks aren't allowed to open businesses in Hogsmeade. In fact, the freaks should just go and die." The others nodded in agreement. I could feel the anger simmering in the room as the masked men turned their attention back to us, ready to cause trouble. But what they didn't seem to notice right away was that they had just walked into a restaurant full of many very large, very drunk Nords, a powerful overlord with his drunken succubus mistress, and some very dangerous new customers. One of those customers being Rex, a Krogan. Rex growled, standing up slowly, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the wizards. "I don't know who you chucklefucks are, but you're not walking out of here in one piece." Shepard, who had been watching the scene unfold, raised an eyebrow and turned to me. "Who are these idiots, Haru?" I shrugged casually. "Just some dumb, racist wizards. They're harmless as long as they don't have their magic sticks on them," I told her. Shepard smirked and waved her hand, glowing blue with biotic energy. With a quick flick, she ripped the wands out of the masked men's hands as if they were nothing more than twigs. The wands floated through the air and landed neatly in her grip before she tossed them onto the counter. "Actual magic wands," Shepard snorted in amusement. "Who would have thought this is how my first day as a spectre would go?" The masked men froze, their bravado immediately replaced by fear. They glanced around, suddenly realizing the very large, angry, and heavily armed crowd they had just insulted. The room fell silent for a moment as the wizards slowly started backing toward the door, trembling. We might have made a mistake," one of them muttered. It only took one drunken Nord to shout, "Get them," before the entire bar exploded into chaos. The Nords dogpiled onto the wizards, pummeling them to the ground without mercy. Even Rex joined in, laughing heartily as he sent one of the masked men flying across the room with a single punch. The wizards screamed, but it was drowned out by the laughter, shouts, and cheers of the crowd. The beating they received was so thorough, I was pretty sure their ancestors would be reconsidering their life choices. XXX Chapter 15, Spaceships and Confessions, Haru. I woke up thankful the next morning that I didn't have a hangover. I didn't get as plastered as the first time I threw a party at the Foxhole, but I was definitely slurring my words by the end of last night. I tried to sit up, but something warm was weighing down both my arms. When I glanced to my sides, my heartbeat picked up fast. Rias Gremory was asleep on my right, completely naked, holding my arms snugly between her bare breasts and supple body. Elo was on my left, also fully naked for some reason, and one of her bare legs was draped over my own thigh. I couldn't remember how we all ended up like this. What happened last night after I closed up the restaurant? Wait, did I even close up the place? Not like there's much worth stealing in there, except for the hundreds of kilos of priceless dragon bones, scales, and meat. My focus quickly snapped back to the present. I had my 2 beautiful and very naked girlfriends snuggled up to me. Although, I don't think anything happened besides sleeping and some naked cuddling. I couldn't remember how they got into my bed. I'm pretty sure I would have remembered if we all had sex last night. Eventually, my stirring woke the girls. Rias stretched, letting out a small yawn and raising her arms high above her head, treating me to a front-row view of her large breasts right in my face. "Good morning, Haru," Rias said with a smile and a wink when she noticed my staring. "That was a fun party last night. Too bad I was only there for the last few hours." "It was definitely a party to remember," Ela muttered, sitting up and rubbing her head. I remembered she was throwing back her drinks without holding back, and judging by her expression, she was feeling it this morning. Ila's eyes widened. Did I wrestle Agner to the floor last night? Over a piece of cake. I chuckled, watching her cheeks flush pink. Yup. And it was hilarious, I said with a chuckle. Ah, I can't believe I missed that. Rias pouted, reaching over to grab her phone. She let out a surprised yelp when she saw the time and bolted out of bed, giving Ila and I a perfect view of her ass next. Turns out the carpet did match the drapes. Come on, you two, she called, already throwing on her school clothes. Commander Shepard said she'd show us her spaceship this morning before she leaves on her mission. I can't miss this. I scratched my head and my ears. She did. I don't really remember that. After the bar fight started last night, everything went a bit hazy. I barely even remember showing up at the end. But the chance to see an actual spaceship. That wasn't something I wanted to miss either. I got out of bed, shuffled over to my dresser, and threw on some clothes. I had a small apartment in the back of my restaurant for the nights when I didn't want to go back to the palace. It's where I let Kuno last night after she put herself into a sugar coma. Ila groaned, ducking back under the covers. You two go on ahead without me, she mumbled. I don't think I'll be getting up for another couple hours. Her hangover must be pretty bad. I leaned over, giving Ila a kiss on the forehead, and turned back to see Rias already at the door, tapping her foot impatiently. So, how did you two end up in my bed last night? I asked, as we walked down the hallway. Rias chuckled, nudging me playfully. You were dead tired last night, Haru. Ila and I could see you were about to keel over, and neither of us wanted you to go to sleep last night alone. And how did you both end up naked? I asked with a smirk. Rias winked at me. I always sleep naked, she told me. Ila was feeling competitive. We turned the corner and emerged from the kitchen into my restaurant. I cringed at the sight before me. The place was, once again, a mess after the night's festivities. Henry was there already sweeping the floor. She looked up with a bright smile when she saw me. Good morning, Lord Haru, she greeted, then gave a small, apologetic bow. I'm sorry I've been away for a few days. My sister Nemu's been a little clingy since our village was attacked. I shook my head. No worries, Henry. Family comes first. Besides, you don't have to worry about cleaning this all up. I'm hiring some pros to get the place back in shape once I'm back from visiting Commander Shepard with Rias. Henry tilted her head. Commander who? I'll tell you all about her when we're back, I promised. Apparently, she's waiting for us right now. Rias's eyes sparkled with excitement. I headed toward the door, motioning for her to follow. I paused and looked back at Henry. We won't be gone long. Try to relax today, alright? With a quick nod of understanding from Henry, I opened the door to, not the bustling streets of Kyoto, but the vast Citadel. As Rias and I strolled the Citadel, I couldn't help but notice the stairs. Everywhere we went, eyes were glued to us. I figured it was partly because of my fox ears and tails, but maybe it was also the sight of Rias, who had a supernatural beauty that people couldn't help but stare at. Do we even know where we're going? I asked, glancing at her as we stopped to get our bearings. We just started walking in a random direction after stepping out of my restaurant. Rias paused, a small blush creeping onto her cheeks. Shepard's ship is docked directly above a place called CSEC, she said, looking a bit sheepish. Though I'm not really sure what or where that is. I chuckled. Well, that makes two of us. Do we know how long we have until she departs? We've got a little over an hour, she said. All right, let's see if we can ask for directions. Tevos is probably up in that tower over there, I said, nodding toward the imposing structure in the distance. But I'd hate to disturb her while she's working. I mumbled. Just then, I noticed a small business nearby that I'd somehow missed before. It was tucked right next to my restaurant. Rias and I exchanged a glance and decided to double back to check it out, hoping someone inside could give us directions. As we approached, an Asari woman standing in front of a kiosk looked up and smiled, her attention settling specifically on me and my unusual features. "Welcome," she greeted, her voice was almost as smooth as silk. "Are you both here to see the consort?" "Consort?" I felt a blush creep up my face as I realized my restaurant was apparently located right next to an alien brothel. Rias snickered beside me, clearly amused at my reaction. "Actually, we're just looking for directions," I managed to say, regaining my composure. I peeked inside the place, relieved to see it was at least a clean high-end brothel. I supposed that there were worse things my restaurant could have been located next to. "We're trying to get to CSEC, we're friends with Commander Shepard and she's leaving soon." The Asari introduced herself as Naelina and gave us a small nod. "Ah, Commander Shepard, she's certainly well known around here." She then proceeded to give us the directions we desperately needed. As we turned to leave, Naelina suddenly raised her hand, holding up a small communicator as she read something on the screen. "Oh," she exclaimed, looking up at me with a new sparkle of interest in her eyes. "It appears the consort is very interested in meeting both of you. You're a very unique visitor in this galaxy," she added, looking over my ears and tails with an almost curious fascination. "We're in a bit of a hurry." "The consort will have to wait," I replied, not really that interested in talking to some random alien prostitute. I wondered if space aids was a thing. Naelina let out a soft giggle, clearly amused by my immediate dismissal. "It's not every day that people say no to the consort," she replied, still chuckling. "Usually, others are forced to wait on her." Just then, her communicator buzzed again. She gave it a quick glance. "You're both welcome to return anytime you like." "That's a rare honor, you know," she added. Rias pouted slightly and tugged on my arm. As we stepped outside, Rias spun around to stick her tongue out at one of the alien security cameras. "Back off. Haru isn't interested in some space slut." She wasn't exactly wrong. "I'm sure she only wanted to talk, seeing as we're neighbors and all," I said. Rias shook her head and muttered about me underestimating my own handsomeness or something. We kept going and followed Naelina's directions through the winding corridors of the Citadel until we reached an elevator with a strange, holographic panel. Alien symbols glowed across the display, we didn't have any idea what they meant. Rias gave me a questioning look. "Think one of these buttons says CSEC?" I shrugged. "Only one way to find out." We took turns pressing random buttons, hoping for the best. After a moment, the elevator hummed to life as it began its slow ascent. Rias and I shared a relieved look, guess we'd hit the right button. As soon as Rias and I stepped out of the elevator, I knew we'd found the right place. The CSEC headquarters was packed with humans and aliens in full tactical gear. We were looking for the Citadel's police force and this was definitely the place. Of course, all eyes zeroed in on us the second we entered, my ears and tails tend to have that effect. Most of the people nearby exchanged curious or suspicious glances, but the most intense stare came from a woman with a floating drone camera hovering over her shoulder. She looked like a reporter, and her eyes practically sparkled when she spotted us. She was mid-conversation with two men in military uniforms, when she left them behind and dashed over to Rias and I. "Hello there. I'm Khalisa bint Sinan al-Jalani, with Westerlund News." "Yep, I'm never going to remember that name." I nodded and waited for her to continue. Her eyes darted over my ears and tails. "Those are the most incredible and realistic augmentations I've ever seen." She barely paused before turning to Rias with a wide-eyed look. "And that cosmetic work you had done is absolutely stunning. Are you two promoting a movie or something?" I folded my arms, amused but a little irritated at the same time. "My ears and tails are natural," I said firmly. "I'm not human." Kalisa's eyes widened as a wave of murmurs swept through CSEC from the corner of my eye. I noticed a couple of agents glancing our way, whispering about whether or not they should quarantine us as unknown aliens. No one made any moves, thankfully. She stared at me for a moment, clearly processing this revelation. Not human. Her voice grew even more intrigued. Then what exactly are you? Before I could answer, Rias stepped forward. Actually, we don't have time for this. She gave Kalisa a sharp look. And for the record, my appearance is perfectly natural too. I'm not human either. The reporter gave Rias a skeptical look, clearly assuming she was lying. Rias smirked, then let her bat-like wings unfurl briefly, causing a gasp to ripple through the surrounding crowd. Kalisa's jaw dropped, eyes wide with shock as she stared at Rias, who simply tossed her hair over her shoulder and took my hand again. Come on, Haru, Rias said, her fingers lacing through mine. I grinned, following her as we walked past the reporter, Kalisa, who was still frozen in disbelief. We headed toward the large central elevator Naelina had told us would take us straight to Shepard's ship. Just as we were about to reach it, a voice called out behind us. Hold up a second. We both turned to see one of the men Kalisa had been speaking to as he walked towards us. I'm Captain Anderson, he introduced himself, extending a hand with a polite but curious smile. Seems like you've stirred up quite a bit of attention here, he gestured to all the people nearby who were gaping at Rias and I. It wasn't our plan to make a scene. We're just here to see a friend before her mission. Captain Anderson raised an eyebrow when he heard we were here to see Commander Shepard. He shook his head with an exasperated huff, muttering to himself. Shepard conveniently forgot to mention that she'd invited 2 never-before-seen aliens for a meet and greet. Especially aliens who could pass for humans. This is massive news. Rias and I couldn't help but giggle at the irony that we were the aliens here. Before we could say much, the other man hurried over. Now, wait just a minute. He introduced himself with a stiff nod. I am Ambassador Udina, representing humanity and the Systems Alliance here on the Citadel. He eyed us with a look that could only be described as paranoid. Why exactly are you trying to meet Commander Shepard? And if you're both really not human, which I'm still not convinced of, what are your intentions with humanity's first specter? The ambassador then launched into a paranoid monologue, rambling on about security protocols, classified technologies, and the risk of exposing military assets to unknown entities. I let him go on for a solid 30 seconds before he finally paused, looking for an answer. Commander Shepard's a friend of ours, I said simply. She offered to show us her ship. My girlfriend here is excited to see it before Shepard takes off on her mission. Something about tracking down an evil Turian? I scratched my head, trying to remember what Shepard had mentioned last night. The details from last night's party began coming back to me, especially the part where Shepard had to practically drag half of her squad out of my restaurant. The drunken Krogan, Rex, had put up a ridiculous struggle, slurring on about how much he loved my drinks. A grin crept across my face as I remembered how Shepard had finally resorted to using her biotics to lift the big guy off the ground, floating him away like an overgrown, very inebriated child. Udina looked unimpressed by my answer, narrowing his eyes as he turned to Anderson. Please remind Shepard that the Normandy is a top-of-the-line military secret. It's not meant to be shown off to random aliens. Especially new species that we've never heard of before. Don't worry, I cut in, trying not to laugh at his frustration. The most complicated piece of technology one know how to use is my phone. Rias laughed and nodded. For me, it's my collection of gaming consoles, she added. Besides, Haru runs a restaurant. He doesn't have time to play Space Spy, no matter how hot that would be. She glanced up at me with a mischievous glint in her eye. But, she added thoughtfully, now that I think about it, I'm definitely ordering some space-themed cosplay for you to try on. She said while licking her lips. Anderson coughed awkwardly, bringing Rias and me back to the present moment. He gestured to the large elevator nearby and offered to take us up to the Normandy. Since neither of us had a clue how to work the controls, and had probably just gotten lucky the first time, we gladly accepted his help. As we entered the elevator, I couldn't help but sigh. Why are all the elevators here so slow? I asked, leaning against the glass wall. Anderson shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. No one really knows. Every time we try to adjust the speeds, the keepers immediately come and fiddle with the settings, changing them right back. It's one of those Citadel mysteries you just learn to live with. I glanced at Rias, who was barely containing her excitement, practically bouncing on her toes as we ascended toward the spaceship docks. After what felt like 2 painfully long minutes, the elevator finally came to a stop, and the doors slid open. We stepped out, and there she was, Commander Shepard, waiting for us with a knowing smile. Anderson must have contacted her on our ride up the slow elevator. She turned towards us, giving me a nod first and then a warm smile at Rias. It was obvious she remembered last night's events all too well. Good to see you again, Haru. That was some party you threw last night. I rubbed the back of my head, chuckling. I'm hoping it doesn't turn into a weekly thing. The place is kind of a mess now. Maybe a monthly party. Shepard smirked. I'll have to remember to stop by at least once a month then. At the very least, Rex will try his best. Rias, who was not in the mood for any more small talk, stepped forward eagerly. Can we please have a tour of your spaceship now? Her eyes sparkled with excitement. I can't wait. Shepard smiled. Sure thing. Follow me. We stepped through the airlock doors, and a robotic voice echoed from the speakers surrounding us, equalizing interior pressure with external atmosphere. The process was brief, and once it was done, we followed Shepard into the main hallway of the ship. My eyes widened as I took in the polished metal walls, and the rows of control panels and stations. It was like something straight out of a video game. This, Shepard said, her voice carrying a hint of pride, is the Normandy State Route 1. One of the most advanced ships in the Alliance fleet. Rias and I returned to my restaurant about an hour later. Rias practically skipped through the door, grinning from ear to ear. That ship was so awesome, she said, almost twirling in excitement. I wish we could just go flying through space like that. It sucks that Jane has to go hunt down an evil alien bent on wiping out humanity, though. When she put it like that, Shepard's mission did sound pretty intense. Also, we'd finally learned that Jane was the commander's first name, but Shepard preferred to go by her last name. She was pretty adamant about that. Rias looked around my still messy restaurant and sighed, telling me that she wished she could stick around a bit longer, but after being out all night, she knew her peerage was probably wondering where she was. Especially since she might have been skipping her classes at the moment. Not that it really mattered to her when she pretty much went to Ooal Academy for fun. Last night was a lot of fun, Haru. She flashed me a warm smile before leaning up on her toes to press a soft kiss to my cheek. I'll see you later, she whispered, her eyes sparkling as she pulled back and gave a small wave before heading across the street to a building the devils rented out to hide their teleportation circle. Once she was gone, I finally figured it was time to clean the place up. It seemed Henry had taken my advice and headed back home for the day. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through a list of local yokai cleaning companies. Just as I was about to hit call, the front door creaked open behind me, and I turned to see Mob walk in, glancing nervously around the disaster zone that was my restaurant. What happened in here, Haru-san? He asked, his eyes wide as he took in the mess. I let out a laugh, slipping my phone back into my pocket. We had a party last night. I guess things got a little out of hand. Mob nodded slowly. Looks like a lot of people were here. Was it fun? The party was a blast. I would have invited you and Ray-Jen, but it got a bit wild. I scratched the back of my head sheepishly. Mob smiled. It's fine, Haru-san. My parents wouldn't have let me go out that late anyway. He looked down, fidgeting a bit. can I get you anything to eat? I offered. I can whip something up real quick. He shook his head. Actually, I was wondering if you could give me some advice. Advice? I raised an eyebrow. Sure thing, kid. What's on your mind? Mob glanced around, as if checking if anyone else was listening, then leaned forward. It's about girls. Mob scratched his cheek, looking a bit embarrassed. I just thought. Well, you're cool, Haru-san. You're handsome, confident, and you already have 2 girlfriends, he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't stop the mischievous grin that spread across my face. Here was the shy, quiet Mob, asking me about girls. Oh, girls, huh? You've come to the right guy. Speaking of girls. Tanya-chan was here last night. She wouldn't happen to have anything to do with this, would she? At the mention of her name, Mob turned as red as a tomato, nodding silently. Oh, this poor kid. What Mob still didn't know was that Tanya-chan was a reincarnator who had been a man in her past life and was not into guys at all as far as anyone knew. But was I about to tell this kid all that? Absolutely not. This was way too funny. So, you're sweet on Tanya-chan, huh? I teased gently, crossing my arms. Mob hesitated, then gave me a determined nod. I want to confess to her. What should I do? I spent the next 10 minutes giving Mob advice and instructions. I then told him to come back to the restaurant in a couple hours and told him that Tanya would be here waiting for him. Was it kind of a dick move giving all that advice when I knew this would crash and burn? Kind of, but then again I was a kitsune and I needed some mischief in my life. As soon as Mob slipped out the door, I couldn't hold it in. I whipped out my phone, fingers tapping on my Yasaka's contact faster than I thought possible. After a couple of rings, I heard her warm voice. Hello, son. Mom. Mob is going to confess to Tanya-chan. I practically shouted into the phone, unable to contain the excitement. There was a pause, a stillness on the other end, and then she spoke. I'm canceling my schedule for the rest of the day. When and where? Yep, she didn't want to miss out on this either. At my restaurant later today, I answered, grinning. But I have to get this place cleaned up first. I was just about to call some people to help clean up, she interrupted me. They might not get there fast enough. We can't miss out on this beautiful train wreck. I'll send all the palace maids over immediately to help clean up. Also, how many hidden cameras do you think we can place in your restaurant without it being too obvious? A couple hours later, Yasaka, Kunu and Tanya-chan were all eating dinner at the bar counter. There was a closed sign hanging in the front door since we didn't want anyone to interrupt what was about to happen. Reijin was sitting nearby in a booth with a hidden camera. He flashed us a thumbs up and Yasaka and I both gave him knowing grins in return. The door to the foxhole swung open, and in walked Mob, dressed in an oversized little suit, looking as if he'd raided his dad's closet for the occasion. His shoes clicked awkwardly on the floor, and in his hands, he held a giant bouquet of flowers. All pink flowers. Of course, I might have slightly exaggerated when I told him Tanya-chan adored the color pink. I knew for a fact she didn't. Tanya and Kunu were sitting at a table near the back, busy eating and chatting. They didn't even notice Mob as he crossed the room, until he stood right beside them. Tanya-chan, Mob said, his voice a little louder than normal, catching her attention. She turned, and the next second, Mob practically shoved the bouquet right in her face. Tanya froze, looking like she was stuck between utter shock and something dangerously close to horror. Slowly, she glanced around, her gaze meeting mine. I gave her my best knowing grin, which only made her narrow her ice blue eyes at me in a way that promised retribution. But was it worth it? Oh, absolutely. Tanya-chan, I have something important to tell you, Mob began, his voice filled with nervous excitement. Myself, Kunu, Yasaka, and Reijin all leaned in, grinning with anticipation. Tanya's expression softened a bit, and she looked as if she was trying to let Mob down easy. Listen, Mob. You're a nice kid and all, but I'm not really. The door creaked open again, despite the closed sign I'd put up earlier. A teenage girl, probably a few years older than Mob, stood at the entrance. She had long brown hair, blue eyes, and was wearing a military-style uniform identical to the one Tanya had on when she'd first walked into my restaurant. Tanya's eyes widened in shock. "Victoria," she murmured quietly. "Excuse me," the girl called out. "I'm looking for a little girl who went missing in this area 3 weeks ago. Her name is Tanya, and she's a soldier like me." Before anyone could react, Mob, oblivious to the new arrival, clutched the bouquet tighter and blurted out, "I love you, Tanya-chan. Please be my girlfriend." The entire room went silent. I watched Tanya, who, for a moment, looked like she was battling every internal demon she'd ever faced at once. Her face went pale, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. Then, without a word, her eyes rolled back, and she fainted. "Huh. Wasn't expecting that kind of reaction," I said, mostly to myself. Mob's face fell, and he stared down at her, confused. Did I say something wrong?" Ray-Jen walked over and pat Mob on the shoulder. "She's probably just not ready for romance yet, Mob," he comforted the kid, but we could all see that internally he was doing his best not to immediately burst out laughing. We all were. "Oh, that's okay then." Mob shrugged. He and Raygon then walked past the very confused soldier, still standing at the front door, and left the foxhole. She watched them leave before turning back to me and my sister and mother. "What the hell is going on here? What have you done to Tanya?"